Bloemfontein High Court to rule on the Gupta's bid to unfreeze R10 million. Remaining with the Guptas, Johannesburg High Court will hear Canadian bank's application to ground a Gupta-owned airplane.
The Constitutional Court has reserved judgment, but we're hoping that by next week we will hear what they are saying.
SASA assures millions of recipients of grants that they will be paid regardless of the outcome of the Constitutional Court ruling. And Super Rugby kicks off this weekend. The first game of the weekend, Hurricanes versus Stormers, currently underway. Very good morning to you. Just gone 9 o'clock, coming to you live from Johannesburg. This is Newsroom. Thank you very much for joining me. I'm Shante Yankees. A lot coming up between now and 12 p.m, including the latest on the Gupta family, as well as the Bank of Baroda's exit or possible exit of South Africa. We will be giving you more updates into that. First things first, let's have a look at your top story. Your lead story at the top of the hour, the High Court in Bloemfontein will hand down judgment today in the preservation order dispute involving controversial businessman Atul Gupta and the Bank of Baroda. The legal representatives for Atul Gupta and the Gupta companies have argued that the High Court erred in granting a preservation order to freeze the assets of the Bank of Baroda and R10 million in his personal account. Well, the alleged multi-million rand corruption relates to the Estina dairy project in Baroda, which has meant for the black farmers. The NPA argued that various deposits were made to the Bank of Baroda from the Estina project and that the money left the account as soon as it was deposited. The NPA says the bank failed to keep proper records of their banking and did not operate within the prescripts of the law. 8 people have since been arrested and appeared in the Bloemfontein Regional Court following a raid on the Baroda farm and the government offices in Bloemfontein in January. Meanwhile, a Canadian bank's application to ground a Gupta-owned airplane will be heard in the High Court in Johannesburg today. Export Development Canada's urgent application relates to the grounding of the plane. The controversial Gupta family is reported to have defaulted on a $41 million loan for the jet. The bank believes the plane might be used to evade justice or for something unlawful. In February, the aircraft was reported to have landed in Russia. For more on the story, we are now joined by our reporter, Griselda Lewis, who is standing by at the South Gauteng High Court. Very good morning to you, Griselda. Why has the Export Development Canada made the application to the High Court?
Well, a very good morning to you, Shante. Well, if this Canadian state-owned bank, Export Development, does have its way, the Gupta family will lose their private jet. Now, this application that has been brought here to the South Gauteng High Court is to have that private jet grounded for a number of reasons stated in the affidavit by this bank, this Canadian bank. They say that R.J. Gupta, for example, who has been declared a fugitive by South Africa's elite police unit, the Hawks, they're afraid that he might use that jet to evade justice, and they say in that affidavit, want to stop the Gupta family from committing crimes. You would recall, of course, that the Hawks had declared R.J. Gupta a fugitive after he refused to hand himself over to police in connection with a corruption case. So what in this affidavit this Canadian state bank is saying also is that the Gupta family had also reneged on several payments, repayments to a loan that it had granted them to initially purchase that aircraft. So what we're also expecting to hear the Gupta family through their lawyers say is that despite a delay in one of the payments, repayments to this loan, that issue, when it did come up, was speedily rectified. And basically what the affidavit is also stating is that the Gupta family is saying that the Canadian bank, Export Development, is basically just trying in a face-saving exercise, given the current shenanigans involving the Gupta family. But I think what's also interesting here, Shante, is that you would know that this particular aircraft is registered with the South African aircraft register. So that means that it is allowed to fly in South Africa, but it has not been spotted in South Africa for a while now, as you did indicate that it was last spotted in Russia, or believed to have landed in Russia, also in India, we understand, and Dubai. So what the Civil Aviation Authority here in South Africa is saying is that it will abide by any decision that this particular court makes, and that it has no interest in this case. So if this court does rule that the Gupta private jet should be grounded, then the Civil Aviation Authority would then proceed with deregistering that plane, which is registered here in South Africa as ZS-Oak. So at this stage, whatever the outcome of this court is, which would perhaps, if it does go in favor of this Canadian bank, then this particular aircraft will not be allowed to fly in South Africa.
Griselda, having a look at the evidence and the circumstances, has the disappearance of some of the Guptas actually strengthened the case against them that the plane should be grounded in your view?
Well, that's very interesting, Shante, because one of the things that was mentioned in the affidavit, or the allegation that this Canadian state-owned bank, Export Development, is making, is that the tracking device on the Gupta private jet has since been deactivated, something that the Gupta family denies. And in actual fact, what the Guptas, through their lawyers, are saying is that the plane itself had never disappeared, and that the bank itself had been notified of the whereabouts of the aircraft when these concerns were raised. So we're expecting those arguments to come through this court here today, as the Guptas try to convince the court that what this Canadian bank is trying to do is trying to put up a face-saving exercise regarding now the current shenanigans involving the Gupta family, and that not renege on any of the repayments to the loan that was granted to them by the state bank. And essentially, we're also expecting on the other end the bank itself to say that, or to put rather evidence through that the Gupta family had actually reneged several times on repayments to the loan it had granted it to initially purchase that aircraft.
Now, just before we wrap it up, who can we actually expect in court? We do know that Jay Gupta is not here, and he has been declared a fugitive. So who are the representatives in court this morning?
Well, what we do understand is that the Canadian bank Export Development has sourced the services of Weber Wenzel, one of the senior advocates within that law firm. And we also understand initially what we were told was that the lawyers who were representing the Gupta family on a number of cases in South Africa would be a law firm also here in Johannesburg. But we're not expecting any of the Gupta family, of course, here, because the whereabouts, of course, of RJ Gupta or Atul Gupta or Rajesh Gupta, also known as Tony Gupta, are not known at this stage. Well, that's according to the last that we heard when we spoke to the authorities here in South Africa.
Definitely. Thank you very much for giving us that update live from the ground. Our SABC senior reporter Griselda Lewis from the South Gauteng High Court. We will be giving you more updates on that story throughout the course of the morning. Remaining with the Guptas in Bloemfontein, where the High Court in Bloem will hand down judgment today in the preservation order dispute involving the controversial businessman Atul Gupta and the Bank of Baroda. For more on the judgment to be handed down by the High Court in Bloem, we are now joined by SABC's Palesa Moeti. She is a legal analyst. A very good morning to you, Palesa. Firstly, what are we expecting coming out from the High Court in Bloem today?
Well, good morning. We are here outside the High Court in Bloemfontein, where we are expecting the Bank of Baroda to challenge the NPA's preservation order, which basically freezes 10 million rand belonging to Atul Gupta, as well as other monies belonging to Gupta-linked companies. But we're not expecting today's proceedings to take very long. It should be the judgment summary that's going to be read by Judge Foshe Jordan, who actually heard this matter over 2 days last week. But joining us right now, just to give us a better understanding of what is happening here, is legal analyst Leboha Mokhele, just to break down this matter to us. Mr. Mokhele, thank you very much for joining us. Just take us through the possibility of a success. Is there a possibility for a success for the Bank of Baroda to get the court to rule in their favor?
Ma'am, before we can even decide or rule on the issue of the success of the application before the court, we need to understand, and also we really need to understand the purpose of the preservation order, because you must remember the allegations that has been leveled against the Guptas as well as the Bank of Baroda is that there were certain payments that were made to Baroda on behalf of the Guptas. One project being the Estina project here in the Free State, wherein the Bank of Baroda received monies on behalf of the Guptas as far as that project is concerned. So as far as them saying that they come into court with clean hands and they want the court to uplift the preservation order, I don't see the court uplifting the said preservation order and saying that the Bank of Baroda really had made a successful case, so that the court can then uplift the order against that the court has made in favor of the NPA in this matter.
Now, when it comes to the Gupta family, if this fails, if this bid fails, what does it mean for them?
You know, every pressure always mounts for the Gupta's family, and I believe this application would be the last stroke in their coffin, taking into account the fact that there are a lot of allegations that has been leveled against them. We can mention few like your state capture, also the inquiry that is also underway at Parliament relating to the ESCOM inquiry again, which also relates to the state capture. So as far as them being people that would say that they can just leave the country without even answering the allegations, or even saying that let's rather exonerate ourselves against all the allegations that have been made against us, I don't see that happening in their favor. And I doubt that even the court or any inquiry will say that the Guptas were honest people and they made an honest business activities with the Republic of South Africa.
So basically, you're not really seeing a positive outcome in this whole matter?
In the matter, I don't see any positive outcome in favor of Bank of Baroda, as well as the Guptas are also involved in this matter. So much so that there are a lot of allegations that have been leveled against them. The state capture will be proceeding in a short while, and as such, these allegations, they would also even involve the Bank of Baroda, the activities that the Guptas have been having with regards to the Bank of Baroda, the financial transactions that the Bank of Baroda have been doing on behalf of the Gupta family, as well as that the fact that all their business, most of their business transactions have been handled and also managed through the Bank of Baroda. So I don't see any successful, this application be successful in favor of Bank of Baroda.
Now, the Guptas previously, or rather last week, argued that the NPA actually misled the court when they obtained that preservation order. Is that an argument that actually holds water?
The court cannot make a ruling to say that there was honest or false allegations that they have made against the Guptas. What the NPA did is that we request the court to preserve these assets up until we are able to properly investigate them. And if there are any charges that needs to be leveled against the Guptas as well as the Bank of Baroda, then that would only be made up until the preservation order has been made in favor of the NPA. So the NPA cannot come to court and say that they would mislead the court, because any order that the court would make, it would make on the basis of the papers before it. And if the court would see that there are allegations which are ill-founded, I believe there would never be a court or even a judge that would say that the allegations made here are irregular, and then would still further grant an order in favor of the applicant, more so the NPA in this matter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mokhele. That is Mr. Leboha Mokhele, who is a legal analyst, just breaking down what is more or less to come out of the High Court here in Bloemfontein. That matter will be heard at 11 o'clock, and we'll be bringing it to you live from the High Court here in Bloemfontein. With that, it's back to the studio.
Thank you very much. Our reporter on the ground in Bloemfontein, Bales Moeti, with regards to the Gupta family, of course, and in relation to Mr. Atul Gupta's personal account there and the freezing of his assets. As 11 o'clock comes, we'll give you those updates. Moving on, South African Social Security Agency, SASSA, says it has a contingency plan to secure grant payments to millions of recipients if the Constitutional Court rules against the extending of the current cash paymaster services contract. SASSA's acting CEO Pearl Bengu has told Morning Live that everyone will get their grants, but there will be inconveniences if the contract is not extended.
The Constitutional Court has reserved judgment, but we are hoping that by next week we will hear what they are saying. What we have done as SASSA, we have made plans that all the beneficiaries will have their money in their cards. But what I was stressing and what I said yesterday as well is that at the cash pay points, should the court say no to our request, that's where we will have most of the problems. Because the people that are collecting their money using biometric are the ones that are elderly and the ones that are disabled. And then the problem would be then, how then do you get those people to take them to merchants where we usually get the money and ATMs where they can actually get their money.
Well, the Independent Electoral Commission will open its 22,000 voting stations across the country this weekend so that voters can update their address details and first-time voters can register. The voter registration is in compliance with the 2016 Constitutional Court ruling that all voters' addresses need to be collected. The Commission says the residential addresses of approximately 2.8 million South Africans on the voters' roll are still outstanding ahead of the 2019 general elections. Earlier, we spoke to the Chief Electoral Officer of the IEC side, Mama Bolo, about who is eligible to register.
Voting station will open tomorrow, commencing at 8, and will also remain until 5 p.m. to do three critical things. Firstly, to allow South Africans whose address details we don't have on the roll to furnish us with those. Secondly, South Africans who are young, 16 years and older, who have received IDs, they can now come and register to enlist on the roll. And thirdly, for those that have moved houses since the last elections in 2016, it is also an opportunity for them to come to update their records and be registered in the new voting district.
Well, you will need your ID book or smart card or birth certificate to register at a voting station, or you can check if you are registered on the IEC SMS line at 32810. Some other news stories. The Northwest Legislature's Standing Committee on Public Accounts, SCOPA, plans to lay fraud and corruption charges against the Provincial Public Works Head of Department, Pakiso Motupi. Well, Public Works made an upfront payment of 103 million rand to IAMA Consulting Engineers last year for the refurbishment of roads in the province.
The millions of rands were paid to IAMA 4 days before the end of the financial year. SCOPA is dissatisfied with the reasons for the HOD's decision. They will now turn to the Hawks to probe further.
The fact that it was not even covered in this report that you've given us, for me, is fraud, and I still maintain that. So, Chair, on the basis of that, I'm moving that as this committee chair, we must open a case of fraud and corruption for the HOD.
Opposition parties support SCOPA's decision.
103 million rand has been stolen from the people's coffers. The only solution to the matter is for us to open a case with the Hawks. The department will clarify what they did not clarify with us to the Hawks.
SCOPA says Public Works is not upholding regulations, resulting in the department's continued irregular spending of taxpayers' money. Olebogeng Khosilinzwe, SABC News, Mahikeng.
Well, workers at the Water and Sanitation Department have vowed to continue striking until their demands are met. Well, 3,000 workers at 53 water facilities nationwide downed tools yesterday in protest against the sourcing of construction projects and alleged corruption under the former minister Nomvula Mokonyane. Departmental spokesperson Sputnik Radau confirmed there were no interruptions to the water supply on the day of the strike. He said a meeting had been scheduled for today between the newly appointed Minister of Sanitation, Gugile Nkutini, and the trade union Nahaul. Well, students at the University of Venda have embarked on a violent protest demanding allocation of NSFAS to all deserving students at the institution. The protest started on Tuesday. Public police have been deployed to the varsity to calm the situation following the barricades of roads. The schooling has also been disrupted at the Mangani village near the university as hundreds of learners and teachers could not pass the barricades. The Western Cape Health Minister will visit Wynberg taxi rank for a listeriosis awareness drive. Well, the Western Cape has 115 confirmed reported cases to the Provincial Communicable Disease Centre for the 2017-2018 year. A total of 77% are from various areas within the Cape Metro, and 29 deaths have been reported to date. The minister will engage with taxi commuters and vendors at the taxi rank to create awareness around listeriosis to prevent further infections. Meanwhile, the National Consumer Commission will brief Parliament on issues relating to listeriosis, the Ford Cougar and other consumer-related issues. Well, on our question of the day today, we're asking you, what do you make of the increased focus on uprooting corruption within the Northwest government? You can send us your comments on SABC Newsroom. We'll have a look at this and more in tweets after the break. Stay tuned.
After a horrific accident, major questions were asked.
So step one, I asked myself, do I really want to die? And my answer to that was, I'm not sure. And then step two was, do I want my parents to bury me? And the answer to that was no.
Learning kept his brain in full action on how the brain works.
When I was in hospital, right, as I was saying, to catch up with my peers, I started to become obsessed with memory techniques and how the brain works and how we retain information.
Touching lives is his continuous mission.
I now work for a non-profit where we deal with access issues regarding kids with disabilities and persons with disability. We're busy working on beach access.
Being wheelchair-bound did not stop fun in his life.
I party in a wheelchair, I laugh in a wheelchair, I smile in a wheelchair.
For all your uplifting stories, catch Bupilong every Friday.
Welcome to Media Monitor, the show that analyzes the big news stories that made headlines. We bring you robust discussions on stories that made headlines in the week, where we interact with media analysts to unpack these top stories. Join me every Sunday morning from 9 to 10 Central African Time as I bring you riveting news and analysis.
Stay tuned to Media Monitor every Sunday from 9 a.m.
32 nations, 44 matches live on SABC1 and 19 SABC radio stations. SABC is the official broadcaster of the 2018 FIFA World Cup Russia.
Welcome back to SABC Newsroom. The question that we're asking you today is, what do you make of the increased focus on uprooting corruption within the Northwest government? You can send us your comments on @SABC Newsroom. Let's have a look at some of the tweets that have already come through this morning. This one coming in from Chief Whip. Many raids but no arrests. I think the Hawks are manipulating evidence. Following the raids in the Free State, there is no progress. MTH on Twitter says the move is very good, but the question is why only now when Zuma is no more? Well, indeed, possibly that is the question. Let's move on to our poll question for today. We're asking, do you think the Gupta-linked Bank of Baroda should be allowed to leave South Africa? Mind you that there's many South Africans that work for some of these companies that need to get paid with this bank. With over 60% of you saying yes, 40% of you are saying no, with over 440 votes coming in. Let's have a look at the tweets behind those numbers. Konnichiwa on Twitter says, how is it possible to force them to keep doing business if they don't want it anymore? And Paul says it's a money laundering bank. Thank you very much for participating in both our question and our poll. Various issues there around the uprooting of the Northwest government with the Hawks raid yesterday, as well as the Bank of Baroda. Mind you, many South Africans are actually being paid through that bank. So should they be allowed to leave the country? That is the question that we're asking. Let's move on to Facebook Online, SABC Newsroom this morning. Today, Prashela Naidu, the man convicted of 2 counts of culpable homicide of top billing presenter Simba Mhere and his friend Katie Shea O'Brien, is expected to be back in the Magistrates Court in Randburg for sentencing today. And then former President Jacob Zuma says education up to tertiary level must not only be free but compulsory. He was speaking at a gala dinner organized by the National Funeral Practitioners Association of South Africa in Durban. And finally, a Zimbabwean court on Wednesday sentenced a serial rapist who was facing 10 counts of rape to 72 years in prison. Well, Charles Matanga Chigombedze, 31, who had been terrorizing women in his home area of Chibi district, was arrested on Monday morning and appeared in the Masvingo Regional Court before Magistrate Davidzo Malunga on Wednesday afternoon for sentencing. You can simply search for SABC Newsroom on Facebook, follow us and interact with us. Let's have a look now at what's making headlines front page center globally, or rather continentally, on our newspapers this morning. We'll start off here at home in South Africa. Well, the Citizen this morning reports that Malema says he is scared of no one, and Kingswell has to stop his threats of violence over expropriation of Zulu land. In Swaziland, the Swaziland Observer says a horrible tragedy befell a Lukele family on Wednesday night as lightning claimed the life of a mother and her son while they were sleeping. And finally, in Zimbabwe, the Chronicle reports that Zimbabwe and Russia yesterday signed 3 memorandums of understanding, one of which seeks to facilitate the setting up of a Russian industrial zone. Let's have a look at what we can expect coming up after the break. We'll take a short break. Do stay tuned.
Violence against women, it also talks to such behavior where teachers, instead of educating kids and give them dignity, they strip them of their dignity.
The First Lady.
The First Lady, her action, it's just unacceptable. I must say that it cannot be condoned. If I had it my way, I would say we had to act and make sure that he goes to jail.
This scourge is not ceasing.
The angry people, the intolerant, it's so huge. So then the scourge finds itself within that particular environment. You cannot say that it's a standalone. It's influenced by social ills, economic challenges.
Join me in Port Sedu live every Monday to Thursday at 17:30.
Well, a parade to welcome the new police minister, Bheki Cele, is currently underway at the SABC Academy in Pretoria. These are the live visuals coming in. We will be going through that throughout the course of the morning. Well, Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has welcomed the surprise announcement of a summit between US President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un by the end of May. Leading at the half hour, indeed, a parade to welcome the newly appointed Police Minister Bheki Cele is underway at the SABC Academy in Pretoria. Cele made his comeback to the police ministry following a cabinet reshuffle by President Cyril Ramaphosa. He takes over from Vikile Mbalula, who was appointed into the portfolio by former President Jacob Zuma. These indeed are the live visuals that we're bringing to you from a very sunny Pretoria this morning in Gauteng as we await to hear that address from the new police minister, Bheki Cele. Some international news now. The U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is in Africa for an official trip. In Ethiopia, where he began his trip, he met with the leadership of the African Union Commission and officials from the Ethiopian government.
He calls his maiden trip to Africa the listening tour. U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is scheduled to visit Chad, Djibouti, Kenya, Nigeria and Ethiopia, where he has begun his trip.
The purpose of my trip to this continent is to listen. I think it is important that we listen to what the priorities of the countries here on the continent are and see where there is good alignment between their priorities and our areas of greatest interest as well. And I think we've already found there are many.
His discussion with the African Union Commission focused on, among other issues, the peace and security in conflict areas like Somalia, South Sudan, Democratic Republic of Congo, the Sahel region and the Lake Chad Basin. He took the opportunity to reiterate U.S. warning against what it denotes as Africa's unbalanced partnership with China.
We witness the model that the Chinese follow. They do not bring significant job creation locally. They don't bring significant training programs that enable African citizens to participate more fully in the future. And oftentimes the financing models are structured in a way that the country, when it gets into trouble financially, loses control of its own infrastructure or its own resources through default.
However, the African Union Commission is quick to stress that each member state knows fully its interests and will decide who to partner with.
You're aware the African continent has many partnerships. I think the Africans are mature enough to engage in partnerships of their own volition, which will be useful for the countries and the continent.
Tillerson has also met with Ethiopian government officials, and the current political and security unrest in parts of the country, plus the state of emergency, has topped the agenda. The U.S. is keen on a peaceful transition to a new leader after the resignation of Haile Mariam Desalegn. It is worried that if Ethiopia slips to instability, the challenge will seep to other neighboring countries and cause an even bigger security problem. From Ethiopia, Tillerson heads to Djibouti. Colette Wanjohi, SABC News, in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Well, there's been strong international reaction to U.S. President Donald Trump's imposition of steep new tariffs on imports of steel and aluminium to the U.S. China has described it as a serious attack on the global trade system. France's economic minister has warned that there would only be losers in any trade war. Well, more than 50% of steel and aluminium exports come from Canada, Japan, South Korea and allies in the European Union. But countries such as Brazil and South Africa are likely to be affected.
I'm defending America's national security by placing tariffs on foreign imports of steel and aluminum. We will have a 25% tariff on foreign steel and a 10% tariff on foreign aluminum when the product comes across our borders. It's a process called dumping, and they dumped more than at any time on any nation anywhere in the world. And it drove our plants out of business. It drove our factories out of business. And we want a lot of steel coming into our country, but we want it to be fair, and we want our workers to be protected, and we want, frankly, our companies to be protected. By contrast, we will not place any new tax on product made in the USA. So there's no tax if a product is made in the USA. You don't want to pay tax? Bring your plant to the USA. There's no tax. We're negotiating now with China. We're in the midst of a big negotiation. I don't know that anything's going to come of it. They have been very helpful. President Xi, I have great respect for, a lot of respect. But I don't know that anything's going to come of that. But we're going to cut down the deficits one way or the other. We have a deficit with China of at least $500 billion. And when you add intellectual property, it's much higher than that.
And of course, back to the U.S. Secretary of State and his visit to Africa. We now cross live to Nairobi, Kenya, to our East African correspondent, Sarah Kamani. A very good morning to you, Sarah. Welcome. Firstly, has Rex Tillerson arrived in Kenya?
Well, he is expected to arrive in Nairobi at about 5 p.m. East African time. From there, he will hold a press conference with the press corps here in Nairobi. And then after that, he will have a meeting with President Uhuru Kenyatta before getting on to the business of the day, which most of it will take place tomorrow on Saturday and a bit of it on Sunday.
Now, we understand that, of course, the U.S. Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, started his trip in Ethiopia. Essentially, what is the purpose behind his trips here in Africa?
Well, the purpose of his trip in Africa mainly seems to be security related. If you look at the countries that he is touring, all of them have partnerships with the U.S. in terms of the fight against terrorism. There is Kenya, Ethiopia, Chad, Nigeria, Djibouti, all of them are on the U.S.'s partnerships in the fight against terrorism. Kenya and Ethiopia are among the countries that have contributed troops to Somalia in the fight against Al-Shabaab. Chad and Nigeria are battling Boko Haram militants. And when you look at Djibouti, it has the U.S. bases here, the marine bases here, which are used in the fight against terrorism. But he'll also be discussing trade issues because the African countries on this side of the continent have actually been in serious partnerships with China, and so the U.S. feels it's losing its ground here, and that is one of the things it will also be discussing. Governance is also a key issue, and in fact we saw it come up yesterday in Ethiopia when Rex Tillerson spoke condemning the state of emergency that has been declared in Ethiopia.
Unfortunately, Sarah, I'm going to have to cut you off short there. That was our correspondent, Sarah Kamani. Let's cross over now live to Pretoria in Gauteng, where the SAPS is officially welcoming the new police minister, Becky Cele.
The charity, guests will remain seated. When the chaplain says, "Come, let us pray," all men will stand and remove their headdress in conjunction with members on parade. Women will remain seated with their headdress on. After amen, headdresses will be replaced in conjunction with members on parade, and members take their seats. Colonel Chumani.
The Honorable Minister of Police, National Commissioner of Police, Deputy National Commissioners, all generals and brigadiers, colleagues, I greet you all in the name of our Lord Jesus Savior. We are going to get our scripture reading from the book of Genesis. Genesis chapter 2, we only read one verse. Verse 15. Then the Lord God placed the man in the Garden of Eden to cultivate and guard it. He said to him, "You may eat the fruit of any tree in the garden, except the tree that gives knowledge of what is good and what is bad." Our theme is based on his century, and is based on the God said, "Place the man in the garden." Come, let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for letting us to see this bright and shining day. This is all because of your love and mercy upon us. Lord, this morning we invite your presence in this wonderful welcoming ceremony of our honorable minister. Like Adam, give him the opportunity to labor in your earthly garden, which is South Africa. Give him vision and strategies that will enable him and his capable team to serve and protect the inhabitants of this wonderful garden against the evildoers. Lord, we pray also for all men and women in blue, especially those that are in the front line. Minister to them and assure them of your presence. Lord, we ask and pray all this in the name of our Redeemer and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you, Chaplain. Ladies and gentlemen, I now call upon the National Commissioner of the South African Police Service, General Kehla Sithole, to deliver the welcoming.
Well, this is a parade to welcome the newly appointed Police Minister, Bheki Cele. It is currently underway at the SAPS Academy in Pretoria, very sunny Pretoria this morning. Well, Cele made his comeback to the Police Ministry following a recent cabinet reshuffle by newly elected President Cyril Ramaphosa. He now takes over from Fikile Mbalula, who was appointed into the portfolio by the former President of South Africa, Mr. Jacob Zuma.
I would like to honor the presence of our Honorable Minister, Minister Bheki, the Deputy Minister, Deputy Minister Mkongi, the Deputy National Commissioners present in our midst, Divisional Commissioners, Regional Commissioners, Provincial Commissioners, and all senior management of the organization, including all South African Police Service members and personnel. I would also like to honor labor organizations in our midst, members of media, distinguished guests, with all protocol observed. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a distinct honor for me to welcome everyone present in this welcoming parade of our Minister, Minister Bheki. On behalf of the South African Police Service members and personnel, allow me to take the opportunity to welcome our Honorable Minister, Minister Bheki, back to our midst, and also congratulate him for his appointment as the leader of our ministry. Our minister is no stranger to this particular environment. Actually, I call him an old horse in the stable. He donned a blue uniform after being a member of the Portfolio Committee at provincial level, as well as MEC for Community Safety and Liaison, and therefore understands our environment. He's got an intensive understanding of what policing is about. We were also honored to serve under his leadership as the National Commissioner of the South African Police Service from 2009 up to 2011. To our Deputy Minister, Mr. Mkongi, thank you for gracing this ceremony with your presence and your continued support and guidance. The retired criminologist and motivational speaker Baroda once said, and I quote, "Part of the process of beginning anew or changing direction is to know where you want to go." I know this sounds simplistic and easy, but this is one of the most difficult of choices to make with clarity. Indeed, starting anew often poses challenges. However, facing those challenges head-on in unity will determine the successful outcome. We know that starting afresh is also accompanied by renewed vigor and hope. This parade, Minister, it's an event of honor, or is a parade of honor to you. And I would also like to substantiate with a quote from Calvin. It says, "No person was ever honored for what he received. Honor has been the reward for what he gave." I think the Honorable Minister has already given a lot to policing in South Africa. And he has already made a valuable contribution towards the creation of a safe and secure environment in the country. And therefore, this welcoming parade of honor, we also take it as a reward of honor for what you gave and for what we've already given, Minister. While we are presenting this particular parade, I would also like to paraphrase on our newly elected President, His Excellency, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa. The new dawn is upon us. We are obligated to embrace the call for a new partnership to build a desired nation and a country in which all may be free, secure, and equal. Chosen men and women in our country have to give expression and meaning to the words of the President. They have been entrusted with mammoth task of breathing life into the expression of this new dawn. And one of those men is indeed our new Minister. And Minister, while we welcome you, it is also an equal opportunity for me to present our new turnaround vision, which has been adopted for this particular organization. This turnaround vision is firstly characterized by the theme. The theme is on a journey to a safer South Africa. And I would like to take the opportunity to welcome you to this particular journey. And please march with us. And the theme is also substantiated and backed up by a slogan: patriotic selflessness is our business as usual. I would then like to say to you, standing in front of you is a number of patriotic men and women in blue. And patriotism is now institutionalized in this particular organization, and it has become one of our internal education programs. And I'll just cite one of the key deliverables, which is the stamping of the authority of the state. As you come in, Minister, we are in action, stamping the authority. I'm sure you have seen our evidence of response at Ngobo when criminals touched us and when they tried to undermine policing. We responded. And I'm sure the Minister has also seen the day before yesterday's response. by KZN to the killing of our captain. And I would like to say it up front that if it is interpreted as a war, it is not a war against the public. It is a war against the criminals. But we refer to it as a response. And at the same time, Minister, I would also like to indicate to you that we will be welcoming you again with the launch of the Octa strategy, which will be taking place before the end of this month. And again, they were stamping the authority against the criminal underworld. This is intended to break down the syndicates, and we know that this is your priority. The last part I would like to cite here is the succession plan, which has been formally introduced in the organization. This particular plan is got short, medium, and long-term priorities. And in the short term, dealing with senior managers, I would also like them to announce the rotation of senior managers, which is starting with the Deputy National Commissioners. And the 3 Deputy National Commissioners has been rotated starting from Monday. I think General Skete will be rotated and moved to management intervention as from Monday. General Vuma will be moved to legal and asset. And General Fazi will be moved to management advisory services. So these are the first change that will characterize the succession plan through rotation. And finally, Minister, I would like to welcome you to the World Class organization. And I want to welcome you to the institution of choice, which is the South African Police Service. Welcome to the continental model of policing, and welcome to the AfriPol drill, and welcome to the mirror for the continent through which all international world and countries see policing on display in South Africa. And I would close with the quote from Walt Disney. Disneyland will never be completed, but it will continue to grow for as long as there's imagination left in the world. The South African Police Service will continue to grow until it rises up to the true meaning of the country's dream and a better life for all. Thank you.
The National Commissioner will then invite the Minister to inspect the parade.
Hey! Attention!
The camera, please.
Of course, these are the live visuals coming in from Pretoria and Gauteng. We just heard General Sitole officially welcoming Police Minister Bheki Cele to the South African Police Service, also making mention to that horrible incident that happened a couple of weeks ago of the Ngcobo police shooting massacre down there in the Eastern Cape. We are told now that Bheki Cele is making his way to inspect the SAPS formation. there we have it. These are just the live visuals there of Beke Cele, Police Minister, inspecting the parade in Pretoria, Gauteng. We will be crossing back live to that. For now, though, let's take a short break here on SABC News. Stay tuned.
This is your midday report. Good afternoon.
I will be faithful.
I assume as President of the Republic of Kenya.
Let's take a look at how African markets and currencies are performing now.
The central bankers say the success of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies is just a bubble.
Breaking stories, detailed economy and sport. Tune into Midday Report every Monday to Friday from 12 p.m. News at 9. We go beyond the headlines of the day's breaking news to bring you all the angles and in-depth analysis of stories. We go beyond the surface, including on how it will impact your life. Join us every day at 9 to zoom in on the day's big stories.
Take your evening well-informed with Primetime News.
Thanks for tuning in. You're watching SABC News Prime. The burning and land reform issue was also a point of discussion on the first day.
If you do not have a skills revolution, you will run into the kind of problems that we're having at the moment.
We have funded about 466,000 students, out of about 800,000 students that are in the university system.
South Africa says insufficient electricity and water remains one of the biggest barriers to development and prosperity on the continent.
The top 4 batsmen in the squad, Hashim Amla, Quinton de Kock, Faf du Plessis and AB de Villiers, are certainties in the starting lineup.
I really believe we cover all bases when it comes to spin bowling, seam bowling, proper pace bowling, and an amazing batting lineup.
Stay tuned every Monday to Sunday from 6 p.m.
An exciting opportunity and an absolute must for those with the spirit of adventure is a Kruger Park night game drive.
The railway station itself is already a sight to behold and offers gracious colonial-style buildings and serves as the departure and arrival point for all train journeys.
I wanted to dress with my best color. Being awarded to do the Serpentine Pavilion is the highest commission in my career. And I wanted just to come and show me with my best clothes, and that is blue.
Catch Trends Travel every Sunday from 12 to 1 for all the global travel and leisure trends.
The Bloemfontein High Court to rule on the Gupta's bid to unfreeze 10 million rand. Staying with the Guptas, the Johannesburg High Court to hear a Canadian bank's application to ground a plane used by the controversial family.
The Constitutional Court has reserved judgment, but we are hoping that by next week we will hear what they are saying.
As SASA assures millions of grants recipients that they will be paid regardless of the outcome of the Constitutional Court ruling. It's gone at 10 a.m. coming to you live from Johannesburg. This is Newsroom. Thank you very much for joining me. I'm Shantay Yankees. A lot coming up between now and 12 p.m., including live coverage as the National Consumer Commission appears before Parliament, as well as the latest from the continent. First things first, let's have a look at our top story. Leading at the hour, the High Court in Bloemfontein will hand down judgment today in the preservation order dispute involving controversial businessman Atul Gupta and the Bank of Baroda. The legal representatives for Atul Gupta and the Gupta companies have argued that the High Court erred in granting a preservation order to freeze the assets of the Bank of Baroda and the 10 million rand in his personal bank account. The alleged multi-million rand corruption relates to the Estina dairy project in Freda, which was meant for black farmers. The NPA argued that various deposits were made to the Bank of Baroda from the Estina project, and that the money left the account as soon as it was deposited. Well, the NPA says the bank failed to keep proper records of their banking and did not operate within the prescripts of the law. 8 people have since been arrested and appeared in the Bloemfontein Regional Court following a raid on the Freda farm and government offices in Bloemfontein in January. Meanwhile, we earlier spoke to our reporter Palese Moeti, who had more information.
We are here outside the High Court in Bloemfontein, where we are expecting the Bank of Baroda to challenge the NPA's preservation order, which basically freezes 10 million rand belonging to Atul Gupta, as well as other monies belonging to Gupta-linked companies. But we're not expecting today's proceedings to take very long. It should be the judgment summary that's going to be read by Judge Foshe Jordan, who actually heard this matter over 2 days last week. But joining us right now, just to give us a better understanding of what is happening here, is legal analyst Leboha Mogele, just to break down.
And just coming out there, let's cross live to Pretoria and Gauteng. Police Minister Bheki Cele is delivering the keynote address as the SAPS formally welcome him.
Provincial and divisional commissioners present, the senior management and all members of the South African Police, the labor representatives, specials, pub crew and SAPO, distinguished guests, esteemed stakeholders, members of media, ladies and gentlemen. Commissioner, this day is not about me. This day is not about you. This day is about the foot soldiers that are standing before us here. This day belongs to yourselves. But
apologies there. Well, we are giving you the live address there of Police Minister Bheki Cele. Of course, he is delivering the keynote address in a very sunny Pretoria this morning, just trying to get a better view there. We do know that the sun is in the way of the visuals a bit, so we're just trying to get a better view there so that we can give you that keynote from Police Minister Bheki Cele. Let's cross back live. Let's try it again.
On the streets of South Africa, we can sleep easy and safe in our houses. We can be part of the peaceful, quiet, and South Africa that we enjoy to live in. Not only that, there must be a group of people that, as you stand here before us, this leadership, you must throw a lot of fear in their hearts and make their knees shiver. Commissioner, we are not going to share any space with criminals. The space is too small, cannot be shared. This space belongs to the safe community of South Africa. This space belongs to the women of South Africa and children that cannot be terrorized, assaulted and have fear on walking on the streets of South Africa. That cannot be shared. I'm sending the message to say, we are not here to share the space with criminals. They must just try to get a space somewhere that we won't be able to reach them because they are not able to reach us. If they stay that way, that's fine. Don't come on our path. Don't think you can see a light at the tunnel. That light might be a train for you. That light might be a train for you. Commissioner, right in here, I see those blue, beautiful people seated up there. From here, get them the combat. Not those blue, nice shirts. Get them the combat, I'll come back to you. I want that unit to be the first to walk with me to these areas they call dangerous, where these criminals they think they have a safe service. I'll be working with us. The head of training, Lieutenant General Kwanas, must invite them to sharpen their skills. Twice they'll sharpen their skills to be well to use the tools we give them, but also to shape their bodies to be able to jump when we go out to the field. So give me that unit. On that unit, say Tuma. Nithunyiwe was sending you. The South African community and the president of this country is sending you to go to the people of South Africa and say, don't be scared, we're here for you. This organization, as you have said, must be the beacon of the people of South Africa. If you want excellence, find it from this organization. This organization does not belong to those people who do not know what else to do. Yes. Don't come out saying don't come here for that. Come here because you know what you want to do. Come here because you want to achieve excellence. This is an organization of excellence. That's why, Commissioner, we shall not accommodate anybody who tarnishes the name of the South African Police Service members. If you think they are here for other things, please, now and here, walk away. Those that are here are those that together in the valleys and mountains, in the dungeons where people are fearing, in the homes where people will have to sleep peacefully and quietly. We will walk those roads, we will walk that path and make sure that together, I want to repeat, together. By the way, we're not going to be behind and ask you what has happened and ask you. We're not going to ask reports from you because we shall be where you are. So we don't need reports from you. We'll see reports, we'll form part of reports. It's the time to wake up. I was so much imbued with this good spirit as I was walking here. I said, thanks for welcoming me, but I'm also welcoming myself back home. Other thing, Commissioner General's job is that this is an asset of the people of South Africa. What you see here is an asset. So, you, me, and all of us here, we have a responsibility of taking care of this asset. South African police must feel home, they must be happy, they must feel welcomed as a part of the organization. So, we will work hard to make sure that you are at home and take care of your own needs and take care
to say there is no police that feels you are not welcome. No policewoman, no policeman that must feel unwelcome in this organization. We know if we work in that way, it will be easy for us to take all what we're supposed to do forward and make sure that life to your corner, where we are saying we are going there. Lastly, as you have said, we are not at war with the community of South Africa, and we shall never be at war with the community of South Africa. But I want to say, whoever declares war against us, uzoyithola. Whoever declares war against us, against innocent communities, against women, against children, against elderly, uzoyithola impi. You want war, you'll get war. You want peace, you'll get peace. And if you decide to engage in the war with us, I can assure there will be one side that will survive, and that side is us. And that side is us. We shall refuse to fall and kneel in front of criminals. Stay away from those cash heists. Stay away from those malls. Stay away from intimidating people in their houses, those house robberies, those bank robberies, those assault of women and children. Stay away from that, because if you are doing that, we are not just inviting us, we are inviting our anger against you. And please, don't start us. Mapoisa, isugile. Mapoisa, isugile. Whoever wants us must find us. That's point. Take care of any member of the community that come to your station. What I saw in Newsroom police station a few days back cannot be part of this organization. Cannot be. Make sure that those people are there because they want help. And when those people come there, ask them to tuma wena. You are here to be sent by the people of South Africa. Nobody here must say not me. Everybody here must say, send me. You are here to be sent wherever South African community is calling you to be. Otherwise, I'm standing here and I declare my love for you. I declare my love for you. I declare the love for the people of South Africa. I declare the love for women of South Africa. I declare, I'm sure my wife will hear me well there, seated there. I declare the love for people, women of South Africa, to be safe, not be assaulted, not criminals play around them. I declare the love for my country to be safe, to be the place of safety that is South Africa. You and us, we shall be there. Wherever they call us, we'll say we're here. And finally, all of us declare Tumamila. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. The final compliments in a form of march past will now take place. The salute will only be acknowledged by the Minister of Police, Mr. Bekitele. Minister Tele.
Indeed, just coming out there of the briefing of Police Minister Bekitele, giving a very refreshing keynote address there, declaring his love for South Africa, ending off saying declaring his love for women and the safety of women and children in South Africa and the safety as a whole, and also mentioning his hands-on approach that the police and the force will be taking going forward, staying away from malls. Also a clear message to criminals that if you wage war on police, the police will be waging that war right back. Let's move on now. The High Court in Bloemfontein will be handing down judgment today in the preservation order dispute involving controversial businessman Atul Gupta and the Bank of Baroda. Well, the legal representatives for Atul Gupta and Gupta companies have argued that the High Court erred in granting a preservation order to freeze the assets of the Bank of Baroda and the 10 million rand in his personal account. Well, the alleged multi-million rand corruption does relate to that Estina dairy project in Freda, which was meant for black farmers. The NPA argued that various deposits were made to the Bank of Baroda from the Estina project and that the money left the account as soon as it was deposited. The NPA says the bank failed to keep proper records of their banking and did not operate within the prescripts of the law. 8 people have since been arrested and appeared in the Bloemfontein Regional Court following a raid on the Freda farm and government offices in Bloemfontein in January. Meanwhile, earlier we spoke to our reporter Palesa Moesi, who had more information.
We are here outside the High Court in Bloemfontein, where we are expecting the Bank of Baroda to challenge the NPA's preservation order, which basically freezes 10 million rand belonging to Atul Gupta, as well as other monies belonging to Gupta-linked companies. But we're not expecting today's proceedings to take very long. It should be the judgment summary that's going to be read by Judge Foshe Jordan, who actually heard this matter over 2 days last week. But joining us right now, just to give us a better understanding of what is happening here, is legal analyst Leboha Mokhele, just to break down this matter to us. Mr. Mokhele, thank you very much for joining us. Just take us through the possibility of a success. Is there a possibility for a success for the Bank of Baroda to get the court to rule in their favor?
Ma'am, before we can even decide or rule on the issue of the success of the application before the court, we need to understand, and also we really need to understand the purpose of the preservation order, because you must remember the allegations that has been leveled against the Guptas as well as the Bank of Baroda is that there were certain payments that were made to Baroda on behalf of the Guptas, one project being the Estina project here in the Free State, wherein the Bank of Baroda received monies on behalf of the Guptas as far as that project is concerned. So as far as them saying that they come into court with clean hands and they want the court to uplift the preservation order, I don't see the court uplifting the said preservation order and saying that the Bank of Baroda really had made a successful case so that the court can then uplift the order against that the court has made in favor of the NPA in this matter.
Now, when it comes to the Gupta family, if this fails, if this bid fails, what does it mean for them?
You know, every pressure always mounts for the Gupta's family, and I believe this application would be the last stroke in their coffin, taking into account the fact that there are a lot of allegations that has been leveled against them. We can mention few like your state capture, also the inquiry that is also underway at Parliament relating to the ESCOM inquiry again, which also relates to the state capture. So as far as them being people that would say that they can just leave the country without even answering the allegations, or even saying that let's rather exonerate ourselves against all the allegations that have been made against us, I don't see that happening in their favor. And I doubt that even the court or any inquiry will say that the Guptas were honest people and they made an honest business activities with the Republic of South Africa.
So basically, you're not really seeing a positive outcome in this whole matter?
In the matter, I don't see any positive outcome in favor of Bank of Baroda, as well as the Guptas are also involved in this matter. So much so that there are a lot of allegations that have been leveled against them. The state capture will be proceeding in a short while, and as such, these allegations, they would also even involve the Bank of Baroda, the activities that the Guptas have been having with regards to the Bank of Baroda, the financial transactions that the Bank of Baroda have been doing on behalf of the Gupta family, as well as that the fact that all their business, most of their business transactions have been handled and also managed through the Bank of Baroda. So I don't see any successful, this application be successful in favor of Bank of Baroda.
Now, the Guptas previously, or rather last week, argued that the NPA actually misled the court when they obtained that preservation order. Is that an argument that actually holds water?
The court cannot make a ruling to say that there was honest or false allegations that they have made against the Guptas. What the NPA did is that we request the court to preserve these assets up until we are able to properly investigate them. And if there are any charges that needs to be leveled against the Guptas as well as the Bank of Baroda, then that would only be made up until the preservation order has been made in favor of the NPA. So the NPA cannot come to court and say that they would mislead the court, because any order that the court would make, it would make on the basis of the papers before it. And if the court would see that there are allegations which are ill-founded, I believe there would never be a court or even a judge that would say that the allegations made here are irregular, and then would still further grant an order in favor of the applicant, more so the NPA in this matter.
Meanwhile, a Canadian bank's application to ground a Gupta-owned airplane will be heard in the High Court in Johannesburg today. Export Development Canada's urgent application relates to the grounding of the plane. The controversial Gupta family is reported to have defaulted on a $41 million loan for the jet. The bank believes the plane might be used to evade justice or for something unlawful. Earlier, I spoke to our reporter, Griselda Lewis.
If this Canadian state-owned bank, Export Development, does have its way, the Gupta family will lose their private jet. Now, this application that has been brought here to the South Gauteng High Court is to have that private jet grounded for a number of reasons stated in the affidavit by this bank, this Canadian bank. They say that R.J. Gupta, for example, who has been declared a fugitive by South Africa's elite police unit, the Hawks, they're afraid that he might use that jet to evade justice, and they say in that affidavit, want to stop the Gupta family from committing crimes. You would recall, of course, that the Hawks had declared R.J. Gupta a fugitive after he refused to hand himself over to police in connection with a corruption case. So what in this affidavit this Canadian state bank is saying also is that the Gupta family had also reneged on several payments, repayments to a loan that it had granted them to initially purchase that aircraft. So what we're also expecting to hear the Gupta family through their lawyers say is that despite a delay in one of the payments, repayments to this loan, that issue, when it did come up, was speedily rectified. And basically what the affidavit is also stating is that the Gupta family is saying that the Canadian bank, Export Development, is basically just trying in a face-saving exercise given the current shenanigans involving the Gupta family. But I think what's also interesting here, Shante, is that you would know that this particular aircraft is registered with the South African aircraft register. So that means that it is allowed to fly in South Africa, but it has not been spotted in South Africa for a while now, as you did indicate that it was last spotted in Russia, or believed to have landed in Russia, also in India, we understand, and Dubai. So what the Civil Aviation Authority here in South Africa is saying is that it will abide by any decision that this particular court makes, and that it has no interest in this case. So if this court does rule that the Gupta private jet should be grounded, then the Civil Aviation Authority would then proceed with deregistering that plane, which is registered here here in South Africa as ZS-Oak. So at this stage, whatever the outcome of this court is, which would perhaps, if it does go in favor of this Canadian bank, then this particular aircraft will not be allowed to fly in South Africa.
Griselda, having a look at the evidence and the circumstances, has the disappearance of some of the Guptas actually strengthened the case against them that the plane should be grounded in your view?
Well, that's very interesting, Shante, because one of the things that was mentioned in the affidavit, or the allegation that this Canadian state-owned bank, Export Development, is making, is that the tracking device on the Gupta private jet has since been deactivated, something that the Gupta family denies. And in actual fact, what the Guptas, through their lawyers, are saying is that the plane itself had never disappeared, and that the bank itself had been notified of the whereabouts of the aircraft when these concerns were raised. So we're expecting those arguments to come through this court here today, as the Guptas try to convince the court that what this Canadian bank is trying to do is trying to put up a face-saving exercise regarding now the current shenanigans involving the Gupta family, and that not renege on any of the repayments to the loan that was granted to them by the state bank. And essentially, we're also expecting on the other end the bank itself to say that, or to put rather evidence through that the Gupta family had actually reneged several times on repayments to the loan it had granted it to initially purchase that aircraft.
Now, just before we wrap it up, who can we actually expect in court? We do know that Jay Gupta is not here and he has been declared a fugitive. So who are the representatives in court this morning?
Well, what we do understand is that the Canadian bank Export Development has sourced the services of Weber Wenzel, one of the senior advocates within that law firm. And we also understand initially what we were told was that the lawyers who were representing the Gupta family on a number of cases in South Africa would be a law firm also here in Johannesburg. But we're not expecting any of the Gupta family, of course, here, because the whereabouts, of course, of RJ Gupta or Atul Gupta or Rajesh Gupta, also known as Tony Gupta, are not known at this stage. Well, that's according to the last that we heard when we spoke to the authorities here in South Africa.
Well, the South African Social Security Agency, SASSA, says it has a contingency plan to secure grant payments to millions of recipients if the Constitutional Court rules against extending the current Cash Paymaster Services contract. Well, SASSA's acting CEO, Pearl Bengu, has told SABC's Morning Live that everyone will get their grants, but there will be inconveniences if the contract is not extended.
The Constitutional Court has reserved judgment, but we are hoping that by next week we will hear what they are saying. What we have done as SASSA, we have made plans that all the beneficiaries will have their money in their cards. But what I was stressing, and what I said yesterday as well, is that at the cash pay points, should the court say no to our request, that's where we will have most of the problems. Because the people that are collecting their money using biometric are the ones that are elderly and the ones that are disabled. And then the problem would be then, how then do you get those people to take them to merchants where we usually get the money and ATMs where they can actually get their money?
Well, the Independent Electoral Commission will open its 22,000 voting stations across the country this weekend so that voters can update their address details and first-time voters can register. The voter registration is in compliance with the 2016 Constitutional Court ruling that all voters' addresses need to be collected. The Commission says the residential addresses of approximately 2.8 million South Africans on the voters' roll are still outstanding ahead of the 2019 general elections. Earlier, we spoke to the Chief Electoral Officer of the IEC, Sai Mamabolo, who is talking about who exactly is eligible to register.
Voting station will open tomorrow, commencing at 8, and will also remain until 5 p.m. to do three critical things. Firstly, to allow South Africans whose address details we don't have on the roll to furnish us with those. Secondly, South Africans who are young, 16 years and older, who have received IDs, they can now come and register to enlist on the roll. And thirdly, for those that have moved houses since the last elections in 2016, it is also an opportunity for them to come to update their records and be registered in the new voting district.
Well, you will need your ID book or smart card ID or birth certificate to register at a voting station, or you can check if you are registered on the IEC SMS line. The number there is 32810. It's 32810. Moving on to some other news, the Northwest Legislature's Standing Committee on Public Accounts, SCOPA, plans to lay fraud and corruption charges against the Provincial Public Works Head of Department, Pakiso Motupi. The Public Works made an upfront payment of 103 million rand to IMA Consulting Engineers last year for the refurbishment of roads in the province.
The millions of rands were paid to Ayama 4 days before the end of the financial year. SCOPA is dissatisfied with the reasons for the HOD's decision. They will now turn to the Hawks to probe further.
The fact that it was not even covered in this report that you've given us, for me, is fraud, and I still maintain that. So, Chair, on the basis of that, I'm moving that as this committee chair, we must open a case of fraud and corruption for the HOD.
Opposition parties support SCOPA's decision.
103 million rand has been stolen from the people's coffers. The only solution to the matter is for us to open a case with the Hawks. The department will clarify what they did not clarify with us to the Hawks.
SCOPA says Public Works is not upholding regulations, resulting in the department's continued irregular spending of taxpayers' money. Olebogeng Khosilinzwe, SABC News, Mahikeng.
Well, workers at the Water and Sanitation Department have vowed to continue striking until their demands are met. 3,000 workers at 53 water facilities nationwide down tools yesterday in protest against the outsourcing of construction projects and alleged corruption under former Minister Nomvula Mokonyane. Departmental spokesperson Sputnik Ritao confirmed there were no interruptions to the water supply on the day one of the strike. He also said a meeting had been scheduled for today between the newly appointed Minister of Water and Sanitation, Gugilen Kwetini, and the trade union Nahawu. Well, students at the University of Venda have embarked on a violent protest demanding the allocation of NSFAS to all deserving students at the institution. The protest started on Tuesday. Public police have been deployed to the varsity to calm the situation following barricades of the roads. Schooling has also been disrupted at the Mangani village near the university as hundreds of learners and teachers could not pass the barricades. Well, the Western Cape Health Minister will visit Wynberg taxi rank for a listeriosis awareness drive campaign. The Western Cape has 115 confirmed cases that have been reported to the Provincial Communicable Diseases Centre for the 2017-2018 year. A total of 77% are from various areas within Cape Town and the Metro, as well as 29 deaths having been reported to date. The minister will engage with taxi commuters and vendors at the taxi rank to create more awareness around listeriosis to prevent further infections. Meanwhile, the National Consumer Commission will brief Parliament on the issues relating to listeriosis, the Ford Cougar issue and other consumer-related issues. On our question of the day that we have been asking on SABC Newsroom this morning, what do you make of the increased focus on the uprooting of corruption within the Northwest government? You can continue to send us your comments on at SABC Newsroom. But let's go back to one of our main stories of today. Earlier, we saw SAPS welcoming the new police minister through a parade in Pretoria. We now cross live to our reporter, Patricia Fasahi, who is with the new police minister, Mr. Becky Cele.
Well, good afternoon, Shante, and of course to our viewers. Perhaps I should say good morning. And one thing we can officially say this morning is that the General is back, and we heard in his live speech that he just delivered here at the official parade that's been held to officially welcome him back into the ranks of the police, not holding back on his words, sending out a very strong message to criminals. Officially from the SABC side, welcome to the ranks of the Police General. But again, you've brought back that culture that we knew when you were the police commissioner. Very strong message to criminals, but some also criticizing that message.
Well, the task of the South African police is to make sure that the community and citizens of South Africa are safe. That's why there is this august organization called the South African Police, women and men in blue, together with the communities. But the problem, the space that the community must be occupying peacefully and staying with their community, enjoying life, sometimes that space is occupied with and by the criminals. The job of the police is to make sure that the space is free for the community. We'll have to shift the criminals away. We are policing here in South Africa. We are policing in the culture of human rights, in the constitutional country. We shall forever respect that. But we shall not respect those that take the lives, make the life difficult for the communities. We shall never declare the war against the community or anybody in South Africa. But whoever declares the war against the community and ourselves will be there to make sure that that war is won on behalf of the community.
You also made it very clear that South Africans will not share the space with criminals. Are you not perhaps scratching them, provoking them perhaps?
No, they are there. No, they are there. I'm not provoking them. If they can go in the sea and hide somewhere, life will be fine for all of us. But they are there. That's why twice already we've buried police since I came. I think it's my 10th or my 11th day today. I've attended 2 funerals with the community of Ngobo and other people that are running away from criminals. They are there. Provoking them, no. Provoking the community, yes. And if you provoke community, we are provoking the South African police as an organization to react and respond, and we shall be there to respond.
And that means we're perhaps going back to what you said years ago, fighting fire with fire.
I repeat, South African police should not break any law in their course of duty. Laws say you need to protect the South African population. That's why we're there. But if you read other laws like your Criminal Procedure Act of Section 49, allows you to use maximum force if it needs be to protect yourself as a police, to protect the community. Fighting with fire with fire, is always ordered on us on the field. Let me tell you the story of Ngobo again. Those people we knew have stolen 10 guns. So we could not have gone with brooms to go and get them because we knew they were armed. Police will learn, they are trained to approach the situation as it need be. They are armed, some of these criminals. For instance, if you go for cash arrest, you also plan to eliminate whatever is on your way to achieve your ill-gotten kind of money and everything. And those people don't carry brooms there. They carry hard stuff. Fortunately, for us, we do have that hard stuff. So if you approach it that way and approach the way you expected them or the way that they think they can do to us, there will be fire with fire. There is no other way. That is not our priority. That is not our top item in the agenda. But if we are called, we will respond.
And I think a lot of South Africans would agree with you that you do not go to a gunfight with a broomstick in your hand. That is something that we can all agree on. But then the question is, are our men and women in blue adequately trained to deal with that fire that's coming their way?
Well, maybe I'll speak to the commissioner again, invite you, showing them training. I don't want to talk to, take them where different training is taking place from this college and to Tabazimbi to show how they train, so that you don't ask that question again.
Okay. And another thing that you emphasized on, women being, an easy target in South Africa. And you said you want to make South Africa so safe that women can walk freely in this country.
Not just a young woman like yourself. You should be able to walk at 2 o'clock in the morning, going wherever you want to go, coming from wherever you want, without fear of anybody assaulting you, anybody raping you, anybody doing any silly thing to you. That's the kind of the standard we want to achieve for South Africa come one day.
In closing, what is your biggest priority, except for, of course, fighting crime in terms of you being in the ranks of SABC again?
Well, there are a few of them. One is the safety of police officers themselves and their comfort and their well-being is one. Two is that communities are safe, as we have spoken about, women and children, but everybody is there. But three is that together with communities, we work together to make sure that South Africans are safe. Hence, we're making an invitation. Hence, we're making a clarion call that we shall be there. He's a specialist in designing the strategy of working with the communities. We shall be there working with them, working with them, and make sure that they're safe.
Well, thank you so much. There you've heard it from the General himself, not holding back, saying that police will not go to any fight where criminals are without being fully prepared to fight equally on the same level with criminals, no matter how daring or dangerous the situation may be. Earlier, he also emphasized that police will not bend a knee for criminals. And there you've heard it, that his vision is ultimately that women who are perhaps the most vulnerable in this country, subjected to the scourge of crime daily in this country, he has a vision that women can walk anytime, any day of, any second, any time of the day freely in the country without fearing that criminals might target them. So is it perhaps a new dawn for the end of crime in the country? Only time will tell us. Let's give it back to you in the studio.
Indeed, only time will tell. Wrapping it up for SABC News on the ground there in Pretoria, Patricia Fasaghi. And let's take a short break here on SABC's Newsroom. Stay tuned.
No. Yes. Yes.
Sports Live every Saturday and Sunday at 7:30 p.m.
Violence against women, it also talks to such behavior where teachers, instead of educating kids and give them dignity, they strip them of their dignity.
The First Lady.
The First Lady, her action, it's just unacceptable. I must say that it cannot be condoned. If I had it my way, I would say we had to act and make sure that he goes to jail.
This scourge is not ceasing.
The angry people, the intolerant, it's so huge. So then the scourge finds itself within that particular environment. You cannot say that it's a standalone. It's influenced by social ills, economic challenges.
Join me in Port Said live every Monday to Thursday at 17:30.
Welcome back to SABC Newsroom. While the Canadian bank's application to ground a Gupta-owned airplane is currently underway at the South Gauteng High Court, let's cross live.
It is entitled to do so. There's the issue of whether the prejudice that the other party suffers can be cured by the delivery of an affidavit. So we submit those aspects can be argued more fully if your ladyship wants to deal with whether the strikeout should be heard or not. To the extent that others have dealt with it, we make those points. But on the point your ladyship asked us to address you upon, and you've already indicated that your inclination is to hear the urgency, that is the only correct approach to take. And we submit that there should be a ruling on urgency and reasons can follow.
Very well. Mr. Cockrell?
Yes, Lady, I don't wish to respond to all of these arguments because I've said we see this case as a sausage. The respondents want to cut the sausage into pieces. I don't want to add another piece to that sausage, but may I make some very brief submissions which may be of assistance to the court? May I begin, Lady, by simply handing up a copy of the DJP's directive, if I may. I'm sure my learned friends have copies. I'm afraid I don't have spare copies available, but they certainly will be aware of its contents. Thank you. I'm going to ask her ladyship to go to paragraph 2 of the DJP's directive. This is the directive from last Friday. Paragraph 2 says the matter is enrolled for hearing on one day, that's today. So the first thing is, when our learned friends say, well, we must persuade this court to enroll the matter, that's not correct. The DJP has enrolled the matter. And he's enrolled the matter for one day, the very point her ladyship made. The second point I would ask her ladyship to have regard to is paragraph 4 of the DJP's directive. The court file must be complete, paginated and indexed, including all affidavits and ancillary applications. Now, an ancillary application includes a strikeout application. So the strikeout application had to be delivered to the DJP's office before noon on the Monday. When did we get it, my lady? We got it, in my case, at 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon.
In my case as well.
Lady, it's entirely late, it's entirely out of time, and there's no explanation for that. In our respectful submission, the respondents are engaged in a game. They want to break the sausage down into pieces. They want to cut up the sausage. And the reasons for that should be obvious. Lady, briefly, on the strikeout application, there's been some debate between the bench and my learned friends regarding, well, what happens if the court doesn't strike out the matter? And our learned friends for the respondents say, well, they then want an opportunity. They want the matter to be postponed so they can come back and file a new affidavit dealing with the matter that isn't struck out in the founding affidavit. That's the one that was filed 3 weeks ago. And the replying affidavit, that's the one filed 1 week ago. Lady, may I give her ladyship what the commentary of Erasmus says on Rule 615? It says a party in opposing affidavits must deal with the allegations sought to be struck out. By doing so, he or she does not waive his right or her right to object to the offending allegations in the affidavits. In other words, the principle is, my lady, when you apply to strike out, you must plead over, if I can use that phrase, even if you do so on a conditional basis. What you can't do is bring your strikeout application, lose it, and then say, I need 3 weeks to deal with the allegations that haven't been struck out. And the authority is given in Erasmus, if I may give them to her ladyship. I'll start with the most recent one. Langham, Langham, Langham versus Milne, 1961, Volume 1, South African Law Reports 811, a judgment of the Natal Provincial Division as it then was, at page 816 D to F. And I'll give her ladyship one other authority, Gore versus Amalgamated Mining Holdings. 1985, Volume 1, SA 294, a judgment of the Cape High Court at 295H to 296B. And so the principle, my lady, is a very simple one. If you apply to strike out, you plead over, albeit conditionally. What you can't do is what the respondents want to do. They've had 3 weeks to deal with the founding affidavit, 1 week with the reply. They say if they lose the strikeout, they want another, who knows how much more time to find a new affidavit. With respect, that isn't correct. Lady, those are our submissions regarding why the sausage should not be cut into pieces.
Yes. In view of the Deputy Judge's directive of 2 March, I would view that the matter has been enrolled for hearing today. On that basis, I'll deal with the question of urgency and the merits together, as well as the application to strike out.
As the court pleases.
Yes, that's my ruling. So ordered.
My lady, you gave me a very clear indication you were not going to...
Yes, but very well, you can make submissions then on the note that says the matter is enrolled for hearing.
And you haven't heard
me also
yes.
not to interrupt, Mr. Cook. This point was raised in reply. None of us...
Very well. I'll give you that opportunity. I'll give you that opportunity to reply, Mr. Cook. Go ahead.
My lady, at this meeting before the Deputy Judge President, there was no question of us waiving any rights, and it was well known.
You are not waiving a right. You are not waiving your right. I will still deal with the question of urgency.
Yes.
I will still have to decide
up front whether the matter is urgent before you go into the merits, my lady.
Yes, but for the purposes of ordinarily, for the purposes of enrollment, I need to decide the urgency first.
This was just a pragmatic measure to get a judge allocated to the matter so that we didn't sit in the urgent court in a queue in a big matter. That's what that was about.
But Mr. Cook, you've all been in possession of the DJP's letter of 2 March 2018, haven't you?
I accept what it says, my lady.
Yes.
I'm just telling you the background to it, how it came about.
Yes.
And if we are prejudiced by it, with respect, that is grossly unfair.
Well, I'm giving you the opportunity to now...
I've dealt with it.
Very well, thank you. Mr. Barno, do you want to deal with that point?
Lady, firstly, while the letter says enrolled, of course you've got to read this sensibly and in a common sense way. That means nothing more than the matter is set out for the 9th of March. It could never mean that it's enrolled in the sense that the requirement, the time-honoured requirement that you've got to persuade a judge on urgency before the matter is enrolled is dispensed with. And it could never be so because the DJP is performing an administrative function. He could never bind the judge hearing the matter to an enrolment on the issue of urgency. So the mischievous reliance on that word enrolled...
Mr. Barno, we always... There are numerous cases where we deal with the matter of urgency together with the merits. We do it all the time.
And that is clearly within the judge's discretion.
Yes,
but
absolutely.
To suggest that because the DJP in this letter used the word enrolled, the matter is enrolled for hearing as far as the requirement that a court be persuaded that it should be enrolled can never be so. So that would mean that your ladyship doesn't have the discretion to decide up front whether the matter, the question of urgency should be heard and whether it should be heard up front and whether the matter should be enrolled. That could never be the case. The DJP didn't have the power. He clearly knew almost nothing about the merits of the matter on urgency and can never bind a judge in an urgent court. So that approach is just an incorrect approach. It's opportunistic and incorrect.
Very well, thank you. Yes. Yes, in view of the fact that, in view of the fact that the matter has been allocated for hearing for 1 day by the DJP, and in the interest of this matter being completed today, I will enroll the matter and I will hear the issue of urgency together with the merits.
Mr. Court, please.
Cockrell, when you're ready.
Thank you, milady. Milady, may I start with what this case is about? It's a case about an aircraft. The ladyship will know it's an aircraft that has achieved some notoriety because it's an aircraft that is used by the Gupta respondents. But it's going to be my submission in due course that the relief my client seeks satisfies all of the well-established principles of interim relief And so for our purposes, nothing of substance turns on the fact that the aircraft is being used by the Gupta respondents. With respect, the same principles would apply if the aircraft was being used by someone who didn't frequent the Saxonwold Shebeen.
So, sorry, the aircraft is, I mean, that's the position right now, right? It's currently being used by the respondents.
It's been used by the Gupta respondents. As we sit here today, certainly my clients don't know where that aircraft is. It's being used by the Gupta respondents. They say they have the right to use the aircraft. They say my client's termination is unlawful. And so as we sit here today, the aircraft is being used by the Gupta respondents. I cannot tell Her Ladyship where that aircraft is because the tracking device has been switched off. And my client simply has no knowledge of the location of that.
But there was an indication from the English lawyers representing the respondents in the action in the UK of the whereabouts of that aircraft?
Her Ladyship is entirely correct.
Yes.
When my client, through its English solicitors, said, where is the aircraft, there was a reply from the English solicitor.
Yes.
May I ask Her Ladyship to go to that? Because what the document indicates is on one occasion we were told where the aircraft was. But the letter then says unhelpfully the aircraft will be going somewhere else in the week, and we've heard nothing further since then.
From my understanding of the papers, it was in 3 places. It was in India, the was it Dubai, and some places I can't remember.
Dubai seems to be a popular landing ground for the aircraft, and it's been in India. But, my lady, we simply don't know where else it may be. May I ask Her Ladyship to go to the letter? Her Ladyship will just let me look up the reference.
Yes. It's AA14. I can't.
I'm sorry, my lady, I'm struggling to find the reference.
Was it not
yes, it's page 1190 of the record. I'm not sure whether Her Ladyship has volumes or not. But
yes, I have volumes. So file 1, 2, 3. Yeah.
In my case, it's file 3, but Her Ladyship's files may be arranged differently. But it's page 1190. It's one of the annexures to the answering affidavit filed by the Gupta respondents. Page 1190.
Yeah, just trying to get there. Yes, AA14.
Mr. Court, please. I believe this is the letter Her Ladyship had in mind, and Her Ladyship's memory is entirely correct. So my client, through the English solicitors, writes to Jones Day, who act for the Gupta respondents in England, and this is the reply they get. They say, we confirmed it was that's the solicitor's understanding. The aircraft was scheduled to travel from Dubai to India in the next few days. We now understand from our client, that's the Gupta respondents, that the aircraft has in fact already flown back to India and is currently located at the Indira Gandhi International Airport in Delhi. And then, the extraordinary statement, we are instructed that the aircraft will be in further use this week. So, Her Ladyship is entirely correct. On one day, we were told this is where the aircraft was. That was on the 5th of February. But we are then told, unhelpfully, the aircraft will be in further use later in the week, and we hear nothing further about the location of the aircraft. So when our learned friends say...
This was on the 5th of February.
It was on the 5th of February, my lady. So the suggestion that we are being told on an hourly basis or a daily basis or even a weekly basis where the aircraft is incorrect. We got the one letter, we accept that. But the letter doesn't tell us where the aircraft is. Certainly as we sit here today, my clients cannot tell Her Ladyship where the aircraft is. Now Her Ladyship will know my client, the first applicant, is in effect the financier of the aircraft. It stumped up the cash, if I can put it bluntly. It's a Canadian company, in effect owned by the Canadian government. It's on risk for the money. It's a very substantial amount of money. The second applicant is the lessor of the aircraft. In other words, it leased it to West Dawn.
Can we just call them EDC?
Stone River.
Stone River. And the Guptas.
As the court pleases, yes. So EDC is the financier, it's on risk for the money. Stone River is the lessor. And the 4 Gupta respondents are using the aircraft, as her ladyship asked me. Strictly speaking, it's leased to the first respondent, West Dawn. But there seems to be no dispute, as far as we can see on the papers, that it's being used by the 3rd and the 4th respondent, that's Mrs. Gupta and Mr. Gupta. And part of my submission to her ladyship today is going to be this. Despite the volume of paper that is before her ladyship, the issues are in fact very simple ones. They are the sorts of issues that would crop up almost every week in an urgent application.
There was a 400-page affidavit filed by your client.
Including annexures. But lady, what I'm going to say is despite the volume of the paper, and we accept there's a lot of paper, the issues are the issues that crop up in any application for interim relief. And what my client is asking for is not final relief. Our learned friends keep saying, well, if this court grants relief, the aircraft will be grounded in perpetuity. That's not the case for lady.
Well, let's just get clarity on this. So I'm not required to decide whether the termination is unlawful. Am I right?
The ladyship is required
That is what the UK court has seized with.
The UK court will make the final decision regarding whether the termination by my client was lawful or unlawful. We accept that. What my client says is it needs interim relief pending the final decision of the UK court. And so the answer to her ladyship's question is this court will have to decide on a prima facie basis, no higher than that, whether the termination by my client was lawful or unlawful. And when I say to her ladyship, it's a sort of issue that crops up every week in an urgent court where interim relief is sought.
Well, Mr. Cockle, there is still the issue of jurisdiction that you'd have to convince me on.
I will address your ladyship on that. I assure you I will. What I'm trying to do is simply indicate the layout of the land, and the assurance I want to give her ladyship is despite the 5 lever arch files of paper that I have, the issues are in fact relatively simple ones, the sorts of issues any court, any week grapples with in urgent court. The ladyship's question is, do I have to make a final decision regarding whether the termination was lawful? The answer is no, that's for the English court. But what I hope to persuade her ladyship is that the case made out by my client at least gets over the hurdle of establishing a prima facie right, and in fact goes much further than that, because I will indicate that the case for termination on these papers is enormously strong. But her ladyship doesn't have to make a final decision in that regard. Now, lady, what do I wish to cover in my address? I'm going to move as swiftly as I can. We have filed full heads of argument. I don't intend to take her ladyship to them. We stand by all of those submissions. What I do wish to do is to focus on the heads of argument filed by our learned friends. And the issues I would like to deal with are in the following sequence, if I may, lady. I'd like to begin with some housekeeping arrangements, which really won't take me very long. I'm then going to deal with urgency. I hope to deal with that quite quickly in order to show why the case is indeed urgent. I'm then going to deal with jurisdiction, my lady. Her ladyship correctly points out that jurisdiction is a live issue. I'm going to submit it's live, but in a very muted way. Really, the submissions on jurisdiction have been watered down in our learned friends' heads so much that there's almost nothing I have to address this court on. And then I'm going to deal, my lady, with the prima facie right on which my client relies. The prima facie right being the right to have the aircraft grounded and put in a safe place, pending the determination of the English proceedings. And then finally, I'll deal with the harm to my client. What is the harm my client is going to suffer if interim relief is not granted by the court? And I hope to be able to cover all of those issues relatively speedily. Lady, may I begin then with the housekeeping? And it's a very short submission. I indicated to her ladyship in chambers, but I now make the submission in open court. The court will know my client filed a supplementary affidavit. He did so without obtaining the leave of the court, but he did so, as it clearly stated, in the expectation that it would apply for leave today when the application was moved. Our learned friends say, if I were granted leave to file the supplementary affidavit, they need time to answer it. I suspect we disagree with them. But,
but Mr. Cockrell, I thought we had agreed on this in chambers.
Absolutely. I'm saying we disagree with them, my lady, but in order to make the point go away,
yes,
my client does not apply for leave to file the supplementary affidavit, and so her ladyship can simply take it out of the court file.
Very well.
And so that would be, milady, pages 1519.
Yes, let me do that right away.
1519 forward, that's the applicant's supplementary affidavit. I do not apply for leave to find it, and I therefore accept it does not serve before the court.
It's right at the end of the...
Right at the back. It will be the very last document in whatever the last file of a lady's papers is. Probably file 4, my lady.
Yes, Mr. Cockrell, I'm returning that to you.
Thank you, my lady.
You can put it into the waste bin.
Yes. It'll go straight there. Thank you, my lady. I'm indebted to her ladyship. Lady, that's the first item of housekeeping. The second item of housekeeping is the debate we've just had. On the strikeout application, I will address her ladyship in due course on the documents that form the subject matter of the strikeout application, and I'll deal with that as part of the merits. I don't intend to duck the issue. It would just be easier and more efficient to deal with it in that sequence. Lady, may I then begin with urgency? Ladyship knows the matter was enrolled by the DJP for today. With respect, our learned friends are entirely correct. When they say they didn't waive their rights to urgency, we accept that. It's not my attempt to be opportunistic, one of their favorite words. It's not my attempt to say that they did waive their rights. But what I do say is the matter is not being heard in the ordinary motion court. Heads of argument were filed in advance. Everyone has read the papers. My client makes a very brief submission, my lady, on urgency. My client says the test, the bar it has to get over is it has to show that it would not obtain substantial redress if the matter were to be heard in the ordinary course. In other words, if it were to set the matter down on the ordinary opposed motion roll and were to be heard in 3 or 4 or 5 months' time, my client has to show that it would not obtain substantial redress on that occasion. And, my lady, for purposes of urgency...
Now, sorry, Mr. Cockrell, but you don't make that point. That point is not made in the affidavit, in the founding papers.
It is made with respect, my lady. Right at the end on urgency, that is the very point that is made.
Yes.
My clients say, why will they not obtain redress, substantial redress in due course? And they then loop back to what they've said about harm in the context of the requirement for interim relief.
Yes, but don't you address that in the heads of argument as opposed to the founding papers?
That all we do in the heads is we crystallize the submission, the allegation made in the founding affidavit. So ladyship knows what is the case for harm for my client. My client says, unless the aircraft is grounded and is put in a safe place, number one, it will deteriorate, it will depreciate, and it may be damaged. Number two, my client faces the risk that the aircraft may be forfeited under the asset forfeiture legislation, in which case my client will lose its interest in the aircraft. And number three, my client faces the risk of reputational harm from an ongoing commercial relationship with the Gupta respondents. Now, that's the case made out in the founding affidavit, my lady. That's the case on harm in the context of the requirement for interim relief.
Yes, but sorry, but all of these points you made and all of the events of default that you rely on would have been in the knowledge of the applicants way back in September, October.
I'm going to come to that in due course because that's, with respect to a slightly different point, that's about self-created urgency.
Very well,
so
very well.
The sequencing I would wish to address the court on is this. Number one, is the matter urgent? And then number two, if it's urgent, is it self-created? Did my client sit on its hands to create the urgency? And the only submission I make regarding...
So sorry, let me just get this clear. So you're saying that your clients will not obtain substantial redress in due course?
Not obtain substantial redress in due course, because if the matter is heard in the ordinary course, in 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 months' time, I can't say when, even if they win, by that time they would have suffered the harm that I've referred the court to. It's the depreciation, the damage to the aircraft, it's the reputational harm, and it's the risk that the aircraft may be forfeited because it is the proceeds of crime or an instrumentality of a crime. And so when a ladyship asks me, well, why will my client not obtain substantial redress in due course? That is the answer. If we set it down on the ordinary opposed motion roll and we win in due course, that harm would have happened And the purpose of enrolling this matter on an urgent case is to avoid that harm. It's to prevent that harm occurring. And Her Ladyship will know what my clients say is they don't want to sell the aircraft in the interim period. They just want the aircraft to be put in a safe place where it can be stored and where it cannot be used by the Gupta respondents.
But it will remain in the possession of the applicants, am I right?
It will remain in possession of the applicants, but critically, my lady, they will maintain it at their own cost. Critically, they can't sell the aircraft. The Ladyship will know, if my clients win in the English proceedings, then the aircraft will be sold and the money which is obtained from it will be used to recover the debt. But that's not what my clients want in these proceedings. All my clients want is for the aircraft to sit in a hangar somewhere where it can't be flown to Dubai or to India or to any other location that is unknown to my client. So with respect, my lady, it's a freezing order, if you like. It's a grounding order. It's nothing more. And why does my client require that grounding, that freezing on an urgent basis? Because absent that being granted on an urgent basis, the harm is going to eventuate. Reputational damage to the aircraft and risk of forfeiture. And so, my lady, if I may summarize, when Her Ladyship says to me, why will my clients not obtain substantial redress in due course, that is the answer. Now, our learned friends say, but in setting the case down on an urgent basis, they have been enormously prejudiced because of the limited time they had to answer. But, my lady, may I give Her Ladyship the facts? In our notice of motion, we afforded the Gupta respondents, we gave them 7 days to answer the application. That's 7 court days, 7 working days. And they took an extra day, so in effect they took 8 days, 8 court days to answer the application. And lady, when one reads their answering affidavit, nowhere do they say, we have been prejudiced by having to file this affidavit within 8 days. That's the one allegation they don't make. On the contrary, they file a 71-page answering affidavit and hundreds of pages of annexures. So with respect, for them to say they were prejudiced in answering, they say it from the bar, you'll hear it today, but Her Ladyship will go to their answering affidavit and say, and look, where does it say we couldn't contact our client, we couldn't communicate with our client, we couldn't get instructions, we couldn't answer the allegations because of the 7-8 days? Nowhere will the court find any allegation to that effect. And so with respect, there is no prejudice to the respondents. They were put under compressed time periods, but there is no prejudice to them. And Her Ladyship will see another indication of that in another one of the letters written by their English solicitors. I'm going to ask the court to go to it. It's page 422. It's an annexure to my client's founding affidavit. Page 422. Annexure FA31, my lady. To orientate Her Ladyship, the letter commences on page 421. It's another letter from Jones Day. That's the English solicitor, my lady, of the Gupta respondents. And I'm going to ask Her Ladyship to go to page 422 to paragraph 7. This is what Her Ladyship will see. This is the Gupta respondents' English solicitors. They say this: should your client, that's EDC or Stone River, intend to take enforcement steps in respect of the aircraft ahead of the English proceedings, or otherwise take action to limit the movement of the aircraft, such steps or action will be vigorously defended, and our client requires 5 business days' notice of your intention to do so, in order that appropriate steps can be taken and so that our client has an adequate opportunity to appear at any related hearing. So that's what they say. They say we need at least 5 days to meet any application you bring to ground the aircraft. Well, my lady, they asked for 5 business days. They in fact got 8 business days. With respect, there is no prejudice to them. They got exactly what they asked for, and then some. Now, my lady, the proposition Her Ladyship put to me is this: well, even if all of that were right, Her Ladyship says to me, didn't my client sit on his hands? Didn't my client create its own urgency? And I said I would respond to that, and let me respond to it now. Lady, what the Guptas say, the Gupta respondents, they say this. They say, well, you served the December notice in the middle of December. I think it was the 15th of December. And why didn't you there and then apply for urgent relief? And the answer, my lady, is a party in my client's possession can have a right to...
It's the 13th of December, right?
I'll ask my learner junior to assist me. I'm told it's the 13th of December. The ladyship is correct. It's the 13th of December. The submission we make is this. One can have a right to cancel a contract, to terminate a contract. But that does not...
Well, if you have just tuned in, you are currently watching the court case there taking place with regards to the Canadian company wanting to ground a Gupta-owned jet. We're going to break away from that in just a moment. And now we're going over to another case which is also taking place this morning, the Bank of Baroda case, which is on your screens now. Just an update there. We do know the ruling as to whether they can leave South Africa and all the banking systems that they have here. That case is expected to get underway as soon as it continues, and there is some information coming out of that. We will be crossing to that, but let's go back to the current case there, the Gupta plane case that the Canadian company has brought forward in grounding the jet.
I don't have the exact date, lady, but it was after the December notice was sent.
Yes.
In other words, when the December notice was sent, my client had no knowledge of the ESCOM application. Lady, that's the application where the Helen Suzman Foundation and another applicant seek relief. It's about 7 billion rand, basically against the Guptas. In other words, they ask for the return of that money. That happens after the December notice. And then after that, in January, milady, the poker application is granted by the Free State High Court. And her ladyship will know the poker application is the restraining order granted by the Free State High Court in relation to the dairy farm in the Free State.
Yes, the Estina, yes.
The Estina Dairy Project. And her ladyship will know the allegations in the affidavits in that case go to systematic corruption on the part of the Gupta respondents. So if her ladyship will now put herself in my client's position, the December notice has gone out. After that, the application is launched by the Helen Suzman Foundation, 7 billion rand to be recovered, very serious allegations of state capture and corruption on the part of the Gupta respondents. The poker application is brought, the order is granted. And what that then leads to is...
That's that preservation order, right?
That's the preservation order, milady. And what that leads to, milady, is another termination notice on the 25th of January, where my clients now say, in addition to the December events of default that you dispute, we've now obtained knowledge about the poker application, that's the freezing order, and we've obtained knowledge of the ESCOM application, both of which raise serious allegations of corruption and state capture. And that gives rise to the notice on the 25th of January where my client says these are additional grounds for cancellation. And her ladyship then knows on the 29th of January the respondents reply and they say we dispute your January notice and we're not giving you the aircraft back. What happens after that, milady? Well, a few days later, on the 4th of February, the tracking device is switched off on the aircraft. And again, if I can just ask her ladyship to put herself in my client's position. They've written the notice. Our friends are entirely correct. They've said they have a right to cancel.
Was that the 20? What was that date of the notice?
It was the 25th of. It was the 25th of January. And the response from the Guptas was on the 29th of January. What happens next? In the light of the correspondence between the English solicitors, on the 4th of February, the tracking device on the Gupta aircraft is turned off. It's switched off. And my clients then discover for the first time they have no way of knowing where the aircraft is because it can no longer be publicly tracked. And then on the 12th of February, milady, The South African Reserve Bank confirms that the Bank of Baroda intends to leave South Africa. Why does that matter, my lady? Her ladyship knows. All four of the commercial banks had long since closed the bank accounts of Oak Bay and the Gupta respondents. The only one which gave them a bank account was Bank of Baroda, and the Bank of Baroda announces, or at least the Reserve Bank confirms, that it will be leaving South Africa. And then 2 days later, on the 14th of February...
That was the alternative bank that the Guptas...
That was the alternative.
We're using.
So all the South African banks closed their accounts. That forms a subject matter of litigation last year. The Bank of Baroda is the only one that keeps the lifeline open. And the Bank of Baroda says it also wants out of here. And it says it will be leaving South Africa, not just leaving the Guptas. And then on the 14th of February, the Directorate of Priority Crimes raises the Gupta raids, the Gupta residence or the Gupta compound in Saxonwold.
That was on the...
That's on the 14th of February. Yes. So lady, if her ladyship now looks back and looks at those events in sequence, this is what her ladyship sees. Her ladyship is entirely correct. In the middle of December, 13 December, the first termination notice is sent. My client says, give me the aircraft back. But what happens after that is the allegations against the Gupta respondents keep rising in intensity. The poker proceedings, the Helen Suzman Foundation proceedings, the closure of the bank accounts, the switching off of the tracking device. And it's those events, milady, with respect, that precipitate the bringing of this urgent application, where my client says, these events are creating a substantial risk of harm to me, and the risk of harm is so great that I cannot obtain substantial redress in the ordinary courts, which is why I must now approach the urgent court. And her ladyship will know, if her ladyship goes back to the December notice, the tracking device hadn't been switched off. The serious allegations of state capture that form the subject matter of the Estila Dairy project were not known to my client. All of those are subsequent events, and in our respectful submission, they have a snowballing effect, and they justify my client in saying, I need to protect my position, and I need to protect it urgently, and the application is then launched on the 14th of February, milady. Lady,
was it the 15th of February?
Lady, I thought it was Valentine's Day, but I may be wrong.
I thought the 14th of February was the raid by the Hawks. So.
The 14th was, that in fact did happen on Valentine's Day.
Yes.
That did happen on Valentine's Day. We launched on the 15th. My learner junior tells me, I apologize. We launched one day after Valentine's Day.
Yes.
So when our learned friends say the urgency was self-created, with respect, that isn't correct. The urgency was created by this cascading sequence of events which happened in very short measure in January, late January and early February, and that's when the application was launched. Lady, may I make one other submission regarding urgency? It's this: her ladyship will know that these proceedings, and indeed matters relating to aircrafts, are regulated by an international convention. It's the Cape Town Convention. Lady, may I say, this was all new territory to me. I had no knowledge about this before.
Never heard of the Cape Town Convention before, ever.
I'm sorry, lady.
I've never heard of the Cape Town Convention.
I hadn't heard of it either. And although it was concluded in Cape Town, it's an international agreement. But it talks to this very issue. And what her ladyship will know from our heads of argument is, it says in these sorts of matters, a contracting party, which in this case is the Republic of South Africa, must grant speedy relief where there's an allegation of an event of default. So now I make it clear, my lady.
Contracting party.
The state contracting party. That's
well,
the Republic of South Africa, not EDC, my client. So South Africa, as the Republic, assumes a commitment. It says, we will undertake to give speedy relief where someone comes before our courts to seek interim relief, not final relief, to seek interim relief. And her ladyship will know, although the convention refers in slightly woolly language to speedy relief, what South Africa had to do was to give a particular commitment, and in the case of this form of relief, the commitment was 10 business days. I'm sorry, 10 calendar days. And the detail is set out in our heads, my lady. So South Africa's commitment, the commitment by the Republic, is to allow matters of this sort to be heard in 10 calendar days, precisely because, as all of the convention parties understood, cases involving the grounding of aircraft are inevitably urgent. And so, with respect, that's exactly what has happened here, my lady. The aircraft involves a very substantial amount of money. The risk to my client is very substantial, and I'll come back to that in due course. And for all of those reasons, my client was justified in saying,
Just coming out there, the EDC filed an urgent court application to have one of its jets grounded belonging to that or loaned by the Gupta family, and that course is currently underway. Let's cross over now live to the court ruling, which is also underway with regards to the Bank of Baroda and them wanting to exit here in South Africa.
As he might have discovered factual information that might have a bearing on the merits, that should form part of his factual report. His opinion and views as to the effect thereof on the merits, however, remain irrelevant. In short, he should refrain from entering the arena. The curator bonus's notice to abide conforms to the above principles. His affidavit, however, insofar as it deals with his views as to the merits and his briefing of counsel to argue those views, do not. I was asked to show my disapproval of the curator's interference in the merits of the application by means of a special cost order. I'm not convinced that the joinder of the curator was necessary at the reconsideration stage at all. However, his joinder was partially brought about and initiated by the stance taken by the applicant in its answer to the application for reconsideration of the Bank of Baroda. Part of the blame for that should be accorded to the applicant itself. However, as shown above, the curator bonus overstepped the bounds of his duties and, moreover, chose to blow hot and cold simultaneously by filing a notice to abide, but still saw fit to brief counsel to argue the merits. I acknowledge that part of the attack against the orders granted by me was aimed against the alleged ultra vires powers of the curator bonus. The curator has a sufficient interest in those powers affecting the performance of his duties to be allowed to respond thereto. Part of his affidavit and the argument on his behalf dealt with that. If he wished to limit his response to those issues, he should have done so and not filed a notice to abide. Considering all the above factors, I am of the opinion that the curator bonus should be held responsible for at least part of the costs occasioned by the filing of his affidavit and the employment of counsel to appear during argument on his behalf. I will provide for that in the orders that I propose to grant. As to costs in general, all the parties except the Bank of Baroda and the curator bonus employed the services of two counsel, justifiably so. The papers are voluminous and the issues of great importance to all the concerned parties. Although Airhaven is only partly successful, it is substantially successful in its application for reconsideration. In conclusion, I grant the following orders, some of which aimed at rectifying mistakes in the original order. I may just mention that the orders that I make is contained in a draft, which will be available after the court adjourns. It's not necessary to note it down at this stage. The following orders are granted. Paragraph 1. Paragraph 1 of the order granted on the 18th of January 2018 is amended by deleting the word, quote, immovable, unquote. 2. The amount in paragraph 1.2 of the order and paragraph 1 of Annexure A to the order is amended by substituting the amount of around 40,360,154 rand 98 cents in place of the amount of around 220 1,202,652 rand. 3. Paragraph 1 of Annexure A to the order is further amended by deleting the words, quote, which constitutes proceeds of crime, unquote, and adding the words, quote, or in any fund or account held by or on behalf of them, unquote. 4. Paragraph 12 of the order granted is amended by deleting paragraphs 12.3, 12.5, 12.8, 12.9, 12.10, 12.12, 12.13, and 12.16. 5. Annexure A to the court order is further amended by deleting paragraphs 1.4, 1.6, 1.7, 1.9, 1.10, 1.11, 1.12, and 1.13, and by adding the following at the end of paragraph 1.15, quote, an amount of around 19 million, unquote. 6. Paragraph 1.5 of Annexure A to the order is amended by substituting the amount of around 73,277,24 in place of the amount of 21,273,277 rand and 24 cents. 7. Paragraph 1.14 of Annexure A to the order is amended by inserting the amount of around 157,000.
The court is currently handing down that judgment on Bank of Baroda. We move on now as we break away from that. Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta has been locked in meetings with opposition leader Raila Odinga. They are now giving an update on the outcomes of that exact meeting. Let's cross now live to that briefing taking place in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi.
Political lives. Regrettably, we have responded to our challenges by mostly running away from them. We have moved from year to year, election to election, never pausing to deal with the challenges that our diversity was always going to pose to our efforts to create a prosperous and a united nation. Consequently, the ties that bind us are today under the severest of stress. Our diversity appears destined to be a curse to ourselves today and to our children tomorrow. In the past, we have given a lot of attention to institutional reforms in the hope that this could lift us to the next level of nationhood and make us a blessed land. 7.5 years ago, we gave to ourselves a new constitution. We put our faith in it as the instrument to revolutionize our nation. In this way and many other ways, we created some of the best hardware any country has ever possessed to engineer their affairs. We must be courageous enough to admit that it has not worked. It has failed because we are yet to upgrade our software. We have been pouring new wine into old wine skins. The gospel tells us that new wine needs new wine skins. The time has come for us to confront and resolve our differences. These differences are becoming too entrenched. No two Kenyans agree on the origins of the differences and what they portend. Millions of our children continue to be born and married into these differences. People are dying out of these differences. Many of these differences are already well entrenched in the third generation of Kenyans that are currently leaking in the fourth generation in primary and secondary schools. Yet in many instances, Kenyans cannot remember why and where they disagreed in the first place. As we fight ostensibly to save ourselves from each other, The reality is we need to save our children from ourselves. My brother and myself have therefore come together today to say this descent stops here. We refuse to allow our diversity to kill our nation. We refuse to be the leaders under whose watch Kenya's lead into a failed nation. This is a call to self-reflection. We have to look into ourselves and challenge our readiness to make the changes that will allow our institutional reforms to work. So long as we remain divided, acrimonious, selfish, and corrupt, no amount of institutional reform will better our lives. The reform process will become an exercise in diverting attention from our own failings and taking refuge in the blame game. We therefore seek your partnership in this initiative, fellow Kenyans. We are all sailing in this one ship. We must come together to scoop out the water that has been seeping, or we shall capsize. We have traveled too far to turn back. We would never make it back to the shore. Yet we can't make it to our destination either. Our only option is to come together and scoop out the waters of animosity that we have been pouring into the boat before we all sink. Once again, as Lincoln said, the result is not doubtful. We shall not fail. If we stand firm, we shall not fail. God bless Kenya. So, kwa Kiswahili tumekuja pamoja na ndugu yangu Uhuru Kenyatta. Tumeongea kwa kirefu na tumekubaliana ya kwamba tunataka kuunganisha Kenya iwe taifa moja. Na tumesema mgawanyika mbali kwako tangu uhuru mpaka leo itakwisha hapa na sisi. Na kutoka hapa tunataka kuunganisha taifa la Kenya ili tutembee pamoja kama watu moja. Hiyo ndio sababu sisi kuja pamoja hapa siku ya leo. And we say that the divide ends here, beginning the process of building the bridge that binds Kenya together. Here's where we are. Sasa ndugu yangu ataongea.
Good afternoon, everybody. First and foremost, I have taken great pleasure this morning in welcoming my brother, Raila, to Harambee House, where, as he has clearly indicated, we have had the opportunity for extensive discussions on matters Kenya. And we have come to a common understanding, an understanding that this country of Kenya is greater than any one individual. And that for this country to come together, leaders must come together. Leaders must be able to discuss their differences. Leaders must be able to discuss freely and openly what ails our country, what is the reason and the cause for the ethnic divisions and frictions that we see across the country, that sometimes lead to even intercommunal conflicts, as we have seen in various parts of our country. We've seen up in Wajir, as we have seen on the borders of West Pokot and Marakwet and many other places. So we have a responsibility as leaders to be able to come together to discuss these issues and to find solutions. Solutions that will bind our people together, that will unify our country, and that will give us a life cycle that is beyond the 5 years that we have established for ourselves. Elections come and go, but Kenya remains. So as we plan ourselves for the future, our future cannot be dictated by the forthcoming election. Our future must be dictated by the prosperity, stability of our nation and the well-being of our people. Democracy is not, as has often been said, an end in itself. It is just a process by which the will of the people is heard, but the national good, the national interest must always prevail over those elections. And this is what me and my brother have agreed, that starting today, we will begin a process of bringing our people together. That we will begin a process of discussing what ails us and what creates division amongst us. And we look forward to the support of every single leader. We look forward to the support of every single Kenyan, so that we can build together a united, harmonious, stable nation where no individual feels left out or left behind. So to me, this marks a new beginning for our country, a beginning in which we hope that we shall march together as Kenyans, and that we can differ in terms of political alignment, but always remain steadfast and united in matters Kenyan. So with those few and brief remarks, a more detailed statement will be given to all of you to be able to read and to understand, that formulates this new beginning that we seek to start. And we thank you for finding time to join us. And as my brother has said, we look forward to you to be our partners to create this new Kenya. Thank you, and God bless you.
And of course, there you have it, President Uhuru Kenyatta as well as opposition leader Raila Odinga coming to what seems to be a peaceful agreement to secure peace and stability in the country upon the backdrop of those talks. Let's take a short break.
Did you know that hippopotamus are susceptible to sunburn and spend most of their sunny days with only their noses out of the water whilst the rest of their body is immersed in water? Their noses have special flaps that close when submerged and can stay underwater for 25 minutes. The hippopotamus is the third largest living land mammal after the elephant and the white rhino. The hippo is 13 feet long and up to 5 feet tall, and the female weighs up to 655 kilograms. The hippopotamus is a grazer, eats up to 40 kilograms of grass at night, and it has a life expectancy of only 50 years.
Welcome to Media Monitor, the show that analyzes the big news stories that made headlines. We bring you robust discussions on stories that made headlines in the week, where we interact with media analysts to unpack these top stories. Join me every Sunday morning from 9 to 10 Central African Time as I bring you riveting news and analysis.
Stay tuned to Media Monitor every Sunday from 9 a.m.
Welcome back. Well, the Canadian bank's application to ground a Gupta-owned airplane is currently underway at the South Gauteng High Court. Let's cross back to those proceedings.
Is to try and snapshot the case. And Her Ladyship will find this beginning on commences on our heads of argument, page 23. And what we've done here, my lady, is we've tried to start with the events of default that seem to us to be the most obvious and the most non-contentious. We accept they become slightly more contentious the further one goes down the list. What are going to indicate.
So all of them basically have the same status, right?
They all have exactly the same
yes,
status.
No one is higher than the other.
No one counts for more than the other. I don't have to come home on all of them. I have to satisfy Her Ladyship on a prima facie basis that one of them is good. And if I come home on that, that establishes the prima facie right on which my client relies. And I'm going to start with the ones that seem to us to be the most non-contentious. And Her Ladyship will see that on our heads of argument, page 23, the heading, Oak-based annual financial statements have not been provided to EDC.
Sorry, just give me that clause again.
So it's our heads of argument, lady, page 23.
Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. I'm on page 23, the paragraph. Yes, yes, okay. That's paragraph, 50 and 51.
Paragraph
right.
50.
Yes.
Lady, let me do it this way.
This is the, okay. There was a requirement to furnish EDC with audited financial statements, right?
I'm going to ask the Ladyship to go to that because it is so non-contentious. I'm going to ask the Ladyship to keep that page of the heads open and to go to the facility agreement. Lady, leave an extracts. This may be where the Ladyship wants to go to the full version, but the one I'm going to refer to is attached to our founding affidavit at page 113.
Yes.
Sorry, page 137, it's my mistake. And then page 137, Schedule 10, General Undertakings. These are undertakings under the facility.
So this is the facilities, right?
This is the facility.
Requirement of financial statements, yes.
And the Ladyship sees paragraph 1 in words of crystal clarity. Says each of the borrower, that doesn't matter, the corporate guarantor, that is Oak Bay, lady. So Oak Bay shall supply to the agent is EDC, my lady. Oak Bay shall supply to the agent insufficient copies for all the lenders, A, as soon as same become available, but in any event within 270 days after the end of each of its financial years, its audited financial statements for that financial year consolidated in the case of the corporate guarantor, that's Oak Bay. So lady, that is not a difficult clause to interpret. It says within 270 days after your financial year ends, Oak Bay, you must give EDC your annual financial statements and they must be audited.
Yes, but there's... Okay, go ahead, sorry. Yes, you can deal with that in reply. Sorry, Mr. Cook and Mr. Barno will address that.
I'm going to deal with
I'm not going to ask you the question. Oh, very well, very well. The question of them having waived, the parties having waived their rights to...
Yes, what I learned a friend say in their heads
to those financial statements.
They refer to the plea, sorry, not the plea, the particulars of claim in the English proceedings.
Yes.
But the lady, the paragraphs they're referring to are dealing with the waiver of the duty to provide quarterly financial statements, not annual financial statements.
So just have that yes, in the plea.
Yes, it's in the lady. It's in the
fourth file, I think.
Sorry, let me. Sorry, lady, I do have it. Lady, it's paragraph 87 on page 614. The Ladyship may want to look it up. So page 614, which is an annexure to the answering affidavit. Page 614, these are what we would call the particulars of claim in the English proceedings. And And I believe this is what her ladyship had in mind. Paragraph 87, there was a waiver of the requirement to provide Oak Bay's quarterly statements. And the only point we make is that's something different. The allegation there was that quarterly statements were not provided. This event of default is a different one. It's your audited annual financial statements. And that is not a case made out in the English proceedings that there was a waiver of that requirement. The ladyship would appreciate, obviously, quarterly financial statements would normally not be audited. Annual financial statements would be. That's the point of the audit, and that's why they are so important to a lender. Now, lady, it's common cause on the papers that the annual financial statements were not provided by Oak Bay within the 270 days. That is not in dispute. The only thing our learned friends do say is they say triumphantly, well, that's something you raised in reply, and you shouldn't have raised it in reply, and that forms one of the subjects of their strikeout application. So let me address it briefly now. Lady, this allegation of breach, the failure to give their annual financial statements, was only referred to in a notice of termination that was served by my client after it launched the application on 15th.
Sorry, just say that again. I wasn't following you. They say that the issue of the failure to, yes.
They say
to provide, to furnish the EDC, right?
They say this issue is a new issue raised in reply.
Yes.
They tell her ladyship what she already knows, that normally a new case should not be made out in reply, and they apply to strike it out. They say they haven't had a chance to deal with it. But lady, with respect, they're correct. It was raised in reply. We accept that. But why was it raised in reply? It's because at the time when the application was launched on 15 February, the notice of termination relying on this event of default had not been served. In other words, my client couldn't have referred to this event of default when it launched because the notice of termination was served after it launched on 15 Feb. And her ladyship will find that by going to the notice of termination, which is Annexure RA7 to the replying affidavit. And I'm going to ask the ladyship to look it up since it's so important and it impacts on the strikeout application.
I'm just trying to...
So it'll be the last
sorry,
file.
Can I ask you to just move that away? We don't need that authority sponge. Okay, let's just move that away now. Just give me the page number, Mr.
Yes, lady, it's page 1501. It'll be right at the back.
Yes.
Right at the back of the ladyship's last file. Page 1501. Lady, this is a notice of termination served on the 23rd of February 2018. And this is the notice where Stone River tells Westbourne that there's been a breach of the requirement by Oak Bay to provide the annual financial statements. My learned friends say, but why didn't you put this up in your founding affidavit? But the answer is obvious. The founding affidavit was deposed to. At least the application was launched on 15 February, and this is a notice that was issued afterwards. So my client couldn't have referred to it. And that's why my client puts it up in reply, because he couldn't have dealt with it in the founding affidavit. So with respect, when our learned friends say it should be struck out because you're making out a new case in reply, it's a subsequent event that happened after the application was launched. And my client, with respect, was entitled to put it up. And one could have expected the Gupta respondents to deal with it if they had something to say. Because they got this on Thursday morning last week. They've had more than a week to deal with it, and they haven't dealt with it. Now, lady, it's a very simple proposition. If they say they actually have given us their annual financial statements, and it slipped through the cracks, well, they could have told us that it wouldn't take them 8 days to work that out. So with respect, our submission is, if the allegation was wrong in reply, they were expected to deal with it, and we've given you, in our heads of argument, we've given a ladyship some of the authorities indicating that. The most well-known is a judgment of His Lordship Mr. Justice Murphy in Tantush versus the Refugee Appeal Board. we've quoted the paragraph in our heads, but His Lordship says exactly that. He says, where something is said in reply, you can be expected to deal with it if it is a matter on which you have something to say. Now, Lady, I've started here because with respect, this is the cut-through point. It's such an easy event of default. Annual financial statements not provided. The only way our learned friends try to dodge the bullet is by saying, well, you put it up in reply. But with respect, that is not a permissible way of dodging the bullet. If they did not breach the covenant, and if they provided us with the financial statements, they've had 8 days in which to tell us that. They don't need another week in which to tell us that. They've had the opportunity and they've spurned it. And so, my lady, what we say is the strikeout application in relation to this termination notice should fail, and the respondent should not be given any further opportunity to deal with the matter because they've had 8 days. And we ask her ladyship to find that on at least a prima facie basis, but probably much more, there's been a breach of that very simple covenant because the annual financial statements have not been provided. Now, my lady, in our respectful submission, there's really no need to go any further than that. If her ladyship wants a shortcut through this case, that is the shortcut because it is so entirely non-contentious. But may I take her ladyship along a slightly longer road and may I indicate what the other events of default are in case her ladyship were not with us on the first one. And I'll try and deal with these in slightly more quickly. Lady, I'm going to ask her ladyship to go back to our heads of argument because it provides a summary of documents that are scattered all around the record. It's page 24 of our heads of argument. And if your ladyship looks at the heading 2/3 of the way down the page, liens by Oak Bay, the third and the fourth respondent, that's Mr. and Mrs. Gupta. This is what we say there, and it's entirely non-contentious, my lady. What we say there is it's entirely common cause on the papers, no dispute whatsoever, that Oak Bay granted a lien over its assets in 2011, and Mr. and Mrs. Gupta granted liens over their assets in 2008. Common cause, no dispute. The liens were granted.
Sorry, yes, Oak Bay granted the lien in 2008, right?
Yes, and the
the
Gupta couple, the married couple, granted an asset over their granted a lien over their assets in 2008.
Yes. No, sorry, that was 2011, wasn't it? The Gupta couple.
It was 2011 for Oak Bay and 28 for the couple.
Oh, sorry.
28 for the spouse.
Okay, I got it wrong. Thank you.
Common cause on the papers. Lady, we say that was a breach of the undertakings in the facility agreement. And I'm going to ask her ladyship to go to that clause just to indicate how non-contentious that should be. I'm going to ask her ladyship to go to the facility agreement, page 143.
I'm going to grow muscles lifting these files. Phew. Yes, page 143.
Ladyship looks on page 143. This is now one of the schedules to the facility agreement.
Is this schedule 9 or which one is this? 9?
It's schedule 10.
10.
If the ladyship sees 2/3 of the way down the page, restrictions on grant and security, this is what a ladyship will read. The borrower, that doesn't matter for our purposes, and the corporate guarantor, that's Oak Bay, shall not. And the borrower shall procure that the personal guarantors for lady are Mr. and Mrs. Gupta, shall not create or permit to subsist any lien over their assets other than those created in accordance with the agreement. Now, lady, I take the ladyship to that clause because our learned friends say in their heads of argument, well, it's true that there was a lien, but the prohibition was on granting a lien after the facility agreement. There was no prohibition on the lien that existed before the facility agreement. But, lady, with respect, there's no merit in that submission because look what the clause says. Shall not create or shall not permit to subsist. Well, what else can it mean when you say you will not permit to subsist, other than if there was an existing lien, you will not permit it to subsist? So the suggestion by our learned friends that this clause was referring forwards, not backwards, is simply wrong, because it gives no intelligible meaning to the prohibition on permitting to subsist any lien.
So you're saying current and forward?
It's current and future, yes.
Future, sorry, yes.
In this case, it was a current one, and we say on a plain reading of that provision, it was a lien that was not permitted, and the consequences, it gave rise to an event of default under the facility agreement and the lease agreement. Let may I simply correct an error in our heads, and we apologize for it. At the top of our page 25, and repeatedly thereafter, we refer to the loan agreement. Lady, it's my mistake. It should be the lease agreement. I apologize for that. It's my error. So every time a ladyship sees loan agreement with a capital L, it's the lease agreement. There is no such document called a loan agreement. And lady, once again, not a difficult matter of contractual interpretation, no factual dispute. It simply is an event of default. It's one of the events of default my client relies on. And it's established not just on a prima facie basis, but on a clear basis in our submission. Let me deal with the next event of default. You'll see it in our heads of argument, page 25. The third respondent, that's Mr. Gupta, Mr. Atul Gupta, ceased to be the chairman of OPEC. Again, my lord, lady, common cause, we say in paragraph 56 of our heads, common cause on the papers. Mr. Gupta ceased to be the chairman of OPEC before the repayment date was occurred, and he was not the chairman of OPEC when the December notice was issued. That is common cause on the papers.
So he ceased to be the chairman sometimes before October?
Before 16 October 2017, that's quite right, yes. So that was the relevant repayment date, and before that he ceased to be the chairman of OPEC. No dispute on the papers, common cause. No denial, no bare denial, no contrary version. The respondents accept that's the case.
Yes, and that clause was, sorry, what was it?
If I can tell her ladyship why that amounts to an event of default, perhaps the ladyship should go to that, because again it's so non-controversial.
Is that the misrepresentation clause?
Yes,
is
lady,
that it?
It's the. I'm going to ask her ladyship to go to. Let me start, if I may, on page 143 of the papers.
Yes.
Which is probably the easiest starting point. Page 143. I'm sorry, lady, I'm confusing myself and probably the court. I apologize for that. The relevant passage, the relevant provision is on page. This is page 134 of the papers, my lady. I apologize. Page 134. Page 134. This is one of the schedules to the facility agreement. Page 134, right at the bottom, subparagraph V. The ladyship will see the heading corporate structure, and this is the warranty that is given. I'm going to go to the second sentence. The personal guarantors, that's Mr. and Mrs. Gupta, directly own a certain interest, and B is the chairman of the corporate guarantor, that's OPEC. So the warranty is that the personal...
Oh, B is the... Sorry, so the A is... Sorry, let me just see that. Directly holds a controlling interest, yes.
That doesn't matter for our purposes.
Yes.
B is the relevant one, is chairman of the corporate guarantor. Corporate guarantor is OPEC. So the warranty is that Mr. Atul Gupta is the chairman of OPEC. And the ladyship now knows it's common cause on the papers that after 17 October, that was not the case. So every time a repayment date arrives, there's a breach of the representation and there's a breach of the warranty, and that is an event of default. And again, milady, we spend some time on it because it is so entirely non-contentious. No complicated factual disputes, common cause. What do our learned friends say? They say, well, that may be right. In fact, not maybe. They say it is right. But what does it matter? That's not a material event of default. But I've had the debate with her ladyship. When one goes to the clause in the lease agreement, an event of default is a failure to comply with any one of the relevant representations or warranties. There is no requirement of materiality. The ladyship correctly points out sometimes the event of default refers to materiality, but not here. It simply says you undertake, you warrant that you will be the chairman of Oak Bay, and that wasn't the case. As simple as that, lady. Let me deal with the next event of default. I'm going to ask her ladyship to go to our heads of argument, page 26, disposal of businesses by Oak Bay. And again, we've tried to summarize them, lady, as fairly as we can, what the papers show, and it's entirely non-contentious. So it's page 26 of our heads, paragraph 58. It's common cause, not disputed, that in the course of 2017, Oak Bay began to dispose of its interests in Infinity Media and in Tegeta. Lady, Infinity Media is the company that I believe is the holding company of ANC
yes.
at the bottom. Tegeta is a mining company which has also achieved some notoriety. Common cause, Oak Bay starts to dispose of its interests on that. We say that was an event of default because, and we quoted in our heads, clause 2015 of the facility agreement said that Oak Bay would not dispose of the material parts of its assets, and in any way, Schedule 10 said that Oak Bay would not sell, lease, transfer, or otherwise dispose of any of its assets. And I'm not going to take a ladyship to those clauses, but again, no factual dispute and no legal dispute. The prohibition in the wording of the clause is clear. One clause says you mustn't dispose of a material part of your assets. The other says you simply mustn't dispose of your assets. We now simply say this. We've read our learned friends' heads to see what they say in answer to that. The only answer we can understand them, the only answer we seem to read is they say, well, in the case of one of the sales, the disposal hasn't been completed. In other words, they say it's correct that Oak Bay was commencing the sale, but the sale hadn't been completed. But the relevant clause, milady, refers to disposing or threatening to dispose. So the prohibition is not just on disposing, it's also on threatening to dispose, which would include the commencement of
that's 20.15,
That's 20.15, milady.
Sorry, just give me those operative words.
The operative phrase is or threatening to dispose, or threaten to dispose.
So it's disposing and threatening to dispose.
Yes. You breach if you dispose or if you threaten to dispose. So when our learned friends say, well, we hadn't completed the sale, that doesn't mean that you were not threatening to dispose. Common cause on the papers, that's what was happening. Lady, the next portion of our heads of argument, material adverse change. And we've tried to summarize it as fairly as we can, lady. And what your ladyship will see in our heads of argument, page 61 forward. Lady, 3 events occurred which are of significance to us, and the ladyship will know them from the papers. One of them is all 4 commercial banks in South Africa closed the bank accounts of the Guptas. That left them with Bank of Baroda. The ladyship knows that. The ladyship knows Oak Bay Resources, one of the subsidiaries, delisted from the JSE. And the third is 2 auditors resigned from Oak Bay. And as we say in our heads, with respect to the lady, it can't be seriously disputed that one or more of those events constitute a material adverse change as defined in the loan agreement, in the lease agreement and the facility agreement. Lady, when all 4 commercial banks close your bank account, and when 2 auditors in short succession cease to be your auditors, and when you delist from the JSE, or when your subsidiary delists because it cannot find a sponsor, with respect, that is a material adverse change. on any reading. And I'm not going to spend too much time on that.
That was Oak Bay Resources, right?
That was Oak Bay Resources. That was the subsidiary.
Yes.
That's correct, yes. Lady, the next event of default I need to deal with because it also forms the subject of the strikeout application. These are the ESCOM proceedings. We deal with it in our heads of argument, paras 63 and 64. I need to correct something in those heads, but let me first tell the ladyship what the point is. The ladyship knows the ESCOM proceedings, that's the application by the Head and Suzman Foundation and one other applicant to claim back the 7 billion rand because of state capture. That was launched in the course of December 2017, and an amount in excess of 7 billion, not 7 million, lady, 7 billion rand was claimed from Oak Bay on the basis of the conduct referred to. And I'm going to ask her ladyship to go to the clause on which we rely in the facility agreement. Lady, our footnote is wrong, so I'm going to ask her ladyship to correct it. The footnote we give is in fact to the lease agreement. I want to ask her ladyship to go.
Is that footnote 85?
It's
right. That needs to change. Okay.
85 must change. If I can ask her ladyship just to cross it out. And let me give her ladyship the reference. It's actually the facility agreement. Schedule 9, paragraph 1H, page 133. Schedule 9, para 1H, page 133. I'm going to ask her ladyship to look that up.
Yes. It's H probably on...
My handwriting let me down. It's not an H, it's an N. My handwriting is illegible for myself.
Let me just change that.
So it's paragraph 1N, not H, but it is on page 133.
Yes.
And this is the warranty given by Oak Bay, not by Westdawn. That's the mistake we make in our heads. It's the Oak Bay warranty we want. This is Oak Bay, the corporate guarantor. What does it say? Subparagraph N. It warrants that no litigation before any court, which, if adversely determined, might reasonably be expected to have a material adverse effect, has been started or threatened against it.
So it might reasonably be expected and must have been started. Okay. Or
yes. It might reasonably be expected to have a material adverse effect. It must have started or been threatened against it.
So,
and it had been.
Doesn't have to be proved.
Doesn't have
at this point in time.
Our learned friends say time and time again, well, that application isn't going to succeed. But that's not the test. The test is, has the application or the litigation, has it commenced? And it had commenced. It commenced in December. And every time after that date, when Oak Bay, on the repayment date, makes the representation that there is no such litigation pending, it's wrong, because it's on the hook for 7 billion rand. The application may succeed, it may fail, it really doesn't matter. It's the fact of the ESCOM application that counts. And lady, why I emphasize that is it's relevant to the strikeout application. Our learned friends, the ladyship will know.
So it had to have started or had to have been threatened, as low as that. I mean,
it's as low as that,
yes.
Yes. And then the test would be, it might reasonably be expected to have a material adverse effect. Well, if the application succeeds, you're going to have to pay 7 billion rand. Very difficult to say seriously that that would not have a material adverse effect. Now, milady, why I emphasize that is the strikeout application says to this court, it must strike out the allegation in my founding affidavit regarding the commencement of the ESCOM application and the annexure which refers to the ESCOM application.
Okay, sorry, I wasn't listening, Mr. I was trying to make the my notes here. Just repeat that, please, in relation to the strikeout. I know the ESCOM and the POCA.
Okay, to come to POCA now.
Yes.
Poker slightly different than lady. ESCOM, our learned friends say, well, you must strike out the ESCOM application, the allegation and the annexures referring to the ESCOM application. And why must you strike it out? Well, they say it's irrelevant and it's hearsay. Well, let me deal with relevance. Lady, with respect, they can't be serious. The January notice terminates because of the commencement of the ESCOM proceedings. How can they seriously say it's irrelevant? Of course it's relevant. It's the basis on which my client relies for sending the January notice. And when they say it's hearsay, with respect, that's not correct regarding the existence of the ESCOM application. The fact that it had commenced is not hearsay, it's a fact. And so there's no hearsay for my client to say, I rely on the commencement of the ESCOM application for the breach of the warranty you gave that there was no litigation against you. Whether it will succeed in due course is irrelevant. Whether the allegations are well-founded are for our purposes also irrelevant. It's not hearsay, it's the fact that counts. And you can't strike out the fact as being hearsay. So with respect, that part of the strikeout application is entirely lacking in merit. And then, Milady, may I finally make some brief submissions regarding the poker application? And again, it may be most convenient for the court to go to our heads of argument, page 28, where we deal with this. This is the application in the Free State regarding the dairy project, the Estina dairy project, the Frieda dairy project. And your ladyship will know what my client does is it refers to the fact that a forfeiture order was granted, not a forfeiture order, a preservation order was granted under poker, and it annexes those papers. And my client, when it sends the January notice, relies on that for the allegation that there was an event of default because a prohibited payment had been made by Oak Bay or one of the other Gupta entities. And I'm going to ask the court to go to that clause, if I may, because it's so important, the lady. It's in the lease agreement, page 197.
So the prohibited payment is the proceeds of criminality.
To indicate how it works, yes. Lady. It's the phrase, in fact, uses the prohibited payment. I'll explain what that means. So if I can ask the court to go to page 197, this is the lease agreement. Let me pick it up on page 195, which is the lead-in. Clause 22 on page 195, the lessee, that's Westdawn, represents and warrants that. And now if I can ask the court to jump to subparagraph R on page 197, this is the warranty.
Yes.
Warrants that no prohibited payment has been made or provided directly or indirectly by or on behalf of to the lessee, that's Westdawn, or any of its respective affiliates or subsidiaries, that's OPAC, or any of their respective officers, directors, or any other person, that's the Guptas. And no officer, director of the lessee or any other person acting on the lessee's behalf has been held by a judgment of a court to have made or received a prohibited payment. Lady, we focus on the first part. The warranty is no prohibited payment has been made to Westdawn and to OPAC. And what is a prohibited payment? The ladyship will find that definition on page 225, and may I ask the court to go to that. Page 225. It's the definition section of the lease agreement.
Yes.
Prohibited payments shall mean, I only refer to part A of the definition, milady, any offer, gift, payment, promise to pay, commission, fee, loan, or other consideration which would constitute bribery or an improper gift or payment under or in breach of any law of any jurisdiction. So what that means is if an improper payment was made to West Dawn or to Oak Bay in breach of a law, that's a prohibited payment. Unlawful or improper payment is made to West Dawn or to Oak Bay, that is a prohibited payment in the meaning of the agreement. Now, what do the papers in the poker proceedings tell us? Estina is set up in the Free State. It gets over 200 million rand from the Free State government. It's meant to be used for milking cows, but the only milking that happens is that all of the money is simply siphoned off to various entities in the Gupta Empire. Lady, with respect, what my client says in the January notice is, well, we don't know whether those allegations are right or wrong, but we've read them, and we say that you breached the warranty not to make a prohibited payment. That's what the January notice says. And when my client launches this application, my lady, it does the same thing. It annexes the poker proceedings. Of course it's hearsay, my lady. My client has no knowledge about what happened in the Free State. But my client says, these are the allegations made by the NDPP. And if you say that it was not a prohibited payment, tell us why. Tell us what happened in the Free State. Tell us what happened with the cows. Tell us what happened with the milking. And what is the answer in the answering affidavit, my lady? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. You will find no version from the Guptas regarding what happened in the Free State. You will find no explanation from the Guptas regarding what happened in the Free State. You will find nothing. What you will find is a strikeout application at 4 o'clock yesterday, where they say strike out all of those proceedings, the poker proceedings, and strike it out because it's irrelevant and because it's hearsay. Well, number one, it's not irrelevant because my client relied on it for the January notice. And if it's hearsay, my lady, with respect, it's correct, it is hearsay. It's hearsay that should be admitted under the Law of Evidence Amendment Act because my client sitting in Canada has no knowledge about what happened in Estina. But it says, this is what the NDPP says, and give me your version because you know what happened, Mr. Gupta. You know what happened, Mr. Oak Bay. You give me the facts, and they don't tell us anything. So with respect, it's hearsay, but it should be admitted under the Law of Evidence Amendment Act because there's nothing more my client can do than to say, these are the allegations made. They are very serious ones. You have the knowledge. Give me your version. Give me your explanation. And what a respondent can't do in that situation, lady, is not answer and then say, strike it out because it's hearsay. It was required to meet the case.
Well, there's certainly an allegation in the press that Mr. Atul Gupta has received 10 million from those
not just in
criminal
the press,
proceeds.
The forfeiture order.
The forfeiture order, yes, that's the whole point. The preservation order.
The freezing
we haven't got to forfeiture yet.
The freezing, it's not the forfeiture order, it's my mistake, it's the
preservation
order.
Yes.
It freezes 10 million rand in Mr. Atul Gupta's account for that very reason. And it freezes a smaller amount in West Dawn's account and another amount in Oak Bay's account. So in other words, those amounts have been frozen in their accounts precisely because the NDPP took the view that it's the proceeds of unlawful activities. And when Her Ladyship asks, what is the answer of the Guptas? What I can tell Her Ladyship is there is no answer other than the strikeout. So, my lady, we say with respect, at least the prima facie case has been made out in relation to the prohibited payments, precisely because they haven't given us a version or any explanation. And I need to go no higher than a prima facie case for purposes of an event of default. Lady, where does all of that leave us? I've taken Her Ladyship through the events of default in some detail, and I've done that because I don't have to establish all of them, but I've done that, my lady, to try and show Her Ladyship just how compelling the case is. This is not a case where there may be a factual dispute or a legal dispute. I've taken the court to the very simple allegations that are non-contested on the facts. When one connects the dots, it's our respectful submission that my client has made out a prima facie event of default, and in fact, it has established more than a prima facie case, and it has therefore come home on the prima facie right, which is all it has to establish for the first requirement for interim relief. And what that leaves, my lady, is the last requirement for interim relief, and I can move quite quickly here. Her ladyship will know the first requirement, at least the prima facie right. Her ladyship will know if you have a strong prima facie right, the other considerations weigh much less in the pans.
Yes.
Stronger
certainly the balance of convenience.
The less you have to have regard to balance of convenience and irreparable harm, as the court pleases. We say the prima facie right is established on such a strong basis that it's unnecessary to have regard to irreparable harm and balance of convenience. But let me address them briefly anyway, in case the court is minded to have regard to those considerations. What do we say about irreparable harm? Well, the ladyship knows from our heads. My client relies on 3 forms of harm. I dealt with them in the case of urgency, but let me elaborate on them a little bit. The first is depreciation and the risk of damage to the aircraft. Lady, my client says it's terminated the leasing of the aircraft. Terminated it. If in due course the English court upholds that, my client was entitled to get the aircraft back at the time when the lease was terminated. Or more correctly, when the leasing was terminated. And if that's the case, then if that's upheld by the English courts in due course, every day in which the Guptas continue to use the aircraft involves depreciation of the aircraft and use of the aircraft that is unlawful. And that is the case for damage to my client. My client says, but if it's vindicated in the English proceedings, the continued use was unlawful. But my client goes further, and it says not just depreciation that is relevant, there's a real risk of damage to the aircraft. And my client says that because it has no knowledge about where the aircraft is being flown to. Lady, we had the debate earlier. Let me just summarize quickly where we come out. My client doesn't know where the aircraft is. The public tracker has been switched off. The Guptas say in their answering affidavit it was not unreasonable for them to switch off the tracking device. But they give no explanation for why that is not unreasonable. So as we sit here today, the financier of the aircraft and the lessor of the aircraft have no knowledge where it is. They told us airily through the solicitors months ago, ages ago, weeks ago, what it was in Dubai on one day and India on the next day. But we are not receiving rolling updates. We simply don't know. And from my client's perspective, that increases the risk of damage to the aircraft because we simply don't know where the aircraft is.
Is it routine to switch off the tracking device?
I'm sorry, Melody.
Is it a routine thing to do, to switch off? It's certainly not. Why, you have the tracking device, so in the event of a crash or something, you're able to track it, am I right?
It's there for a purpose, so that it can be tracked. And I believe it was the Malaysian aircraft that went down and no one ever tracked after that. Yes, it's there for a reason, milady. It's a tracking device that people can track it. And the question the court will ask is, why have they switched off the tracking device? And we don't know the answer. They say, well, it wasn't unreasonable. But the inference my client draws is, you must have done that because you want to use the aircraft for an unlawful purpose. My client can't say that. My client just draws the inference. It says, well, that's one inference. You would switch it off so no one knows where the aircraft is because you want to use it for an unlawful purpose. And the lady, once again, you will go to the answering affidavit and you will ask yourself, what do the Guptas say about that inference? Do they say the aircraft was not being used for an unlawful purpose and is not being used for an unlawful purpose, and they simply don't tell the ladyship? They tell you nothing. So ladyship is now in a world where my client draws the inference, you must have switched off the device for some reason. One reason would be to engage in unlawful activities. If that's not the case, the Guptas could have said it on affidavit. They could have said, you are wrong. But they simply don't make that allegation. And in the absence of that allegation, my lady, it gives rise to the second form of harm that my client refers to. The harm it may suffer is that the aircraft may be forfeited by the asset forfeiture unit, and my client may lose its interest. I need to emphasize that. We know the asset forfeiture unit has already gone after various of the Gupta respondents. Yes. We know that from the Free State. It hasn't gone after the aircraft. I don't know whether it intends to go after the aircraft. What I do say is that if the aircraft is an instrumentality of an offence, or if the aircraft is the proceeds of unlawful activities, it may be forfeited under POCA. And if it's forfeited, my lady, my client loses all of its interests unless he comes home on the so-called innocent owner defence. Lady, I need to emphasize that it's an extraordinary feature of poker that when the asset is forfeited,
yes,
innocent owners may also lose their
yes.
interest. So a bank to which the house which was used by the drug lord was mortgaged, the bank may also lose its interest even though the bank had no knowledge about the fact
Yes,
that
there's that real concern.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And this is my client's concern. My client says, well, I don't know what the intentions of the asset forfeiture unit are. But if they were to forfeit the aircraft and you won't tell me whether it's been used for a lawful purpose or not, I, EDC, would have to come home under the innocent owner defence. And the difficulty for my client is it's extremely concerned that without an interim order, it may not come home on the innocent owner defence. And we've given Her Ladyship the details in our heads of argument.
Yes.
And so Her Ladyship contested in a very simple way. We don't know, when I say we, my clients don't know, when the rental is paid every month by Westdawn, is that money tainted? Is that the proceeds of unlawful activities? We simply don't know. But our risk is, if there was a reasonable suspicion that the rent coming to us was the proceeds of unlawful activity, we would lose the ability to rely on the innocent owner defence. And that's why my client says the only way it can protect itself against the future forfeiture application is by asking for an interim order where no rent is paid by Westdawn. The aircraft is put in a safe place where it can't be used for unlawful purposes. And that's the only way my client can protect its interests going forward. Without that, it faces the risk of not coming home on
But there is an undertaking, I believe, in relation to any damages that may follow.
I'm not aware of
Oh, I thought there was. Sorry, maybe I'm mistaken. Sorry. Yes.
No, that's a different. Sorry, Lady, I believe Her Ladyship may have a different undertaking in mind. What we said, say we, my clients, is if they were to get interim relief and were to fail in the English proceedings, they would compensate the Guptas for any proven damage. And that undertaking, that offer was rejected by the Guptas.
Okay.
So, Lady, that's the second form of harm our client relies on. It says that's the harm I may suffer without interim relief. And the third form is the reputational harm. Lady, I learned friends say this is something new, but it's not something new. The case is made out in our founding affidavit. My client says, look at the history of firms which have been associated with the Guptas.
We have KPMG and, what is it, McKinsey and
Bell Pottinger.
Bell Pottinger, yes.
Lady, it's not a short list, and the history of what were formerly blue chip companies, which have now had their reputational base enormously eroded, is a long one. And my client says that is a form of harm it should not be exposed to. So, Lady, that is our case on harm. My clients say that is the harm that they will suffer if interim relief is not granted and if they succeed in due course in the English proceedings. And the purpose of the interim interdict is to prevent that harm from occurring. What do the Guptas say about the balance of convenience? Because they say, well, in fact, they say very little. But if they were going to run that case, they would have to say the balance of convenience favours not awarding interim relief. But, Lady, put yourself in the position of the Guptas. What is the inconvenience to them if the court grants the order we ask for? The aircraft is put in a safe place. It's maintained by my client at my client's expense. The Guptas will not be required to pay rent on the aircraft. So they're not paying the rent every month. Since they're not paying the rent every month, there's a saving to them. And what can they do with the money they don't pay as rent? Well, they can fly first class to Dubai, or they can charter an aircraft to Dubai. That's what they can do. There is no inconvenience to them. The fact that they would prefer this particular Bombardier.
Well, first class is far cheaper.
Yes. We'd all like to agree, Lady. So the inconvenience to them
may not be as comfortable, but it's certainly cheaper.
It may not have some of the trappings of the
yes.
Lady, but it certainly wouldn't be more expensive. So with respect, there is no inconvenience to them, and I've already made the point about the undertaking. In the context of balance of convenience, people in my client's position are often required to give an undertaking if harm is suffered. My client has made that undertaking to the Guptas and they have spurned it, they have rejected it. Then, Lady, the last requirement for interim relief, no other remedy with respect to my client. No, has no.
Sorry, the undertaking I was referring to was in fact this undertaking.
Yes. So, Ladyship will know, an applicant is sometimes in a commercial context, required to say, if I get the interim relief and I fail in final relief, I'll compensate you for proven loss.
Yes.
My client has given that undertaking. No one suggests the Canadian government is not good for the money. The Guptas simply say they don't accept the undertaking, but they won't tell us why. And then, my lady, finally, on no other remedy, with respect, there is no other remedy for my client. The Guptas flirted for a while with the suggestion that the remedy of my client was to accept the exercise of the call option. And with respect, we've indicated why that is not a remedy at all. And I'll deal with it in reply if they persist with that.
Okay, well, they did exercise the call option.
They actually didn't.
Well, you said it was not.
They sent a letter where they said they would like to exercise the call option as long as they can find an onward buyer.
Ah, I see.
So they say, I'll buy your aircraft EDC, but only if I can find someone else to buy it from me. And all of that is conditional. Well, that's not the exercise of a call option. They don't tell us they found the onward buyer. That's a nothing from my client's perspective.
But do you also not need the consent of the financier in order to exercise the call option?
No, we're not planning.
No.
We're not planning to let it up. My client says it's terminated the leasing.
Yes.
My client doesn't purport to exercise any option. Lady, I'm very close to finishing my address. Where does all of that lead us? I'm going to ask her ladyship to go to the notice of motion, which her ladyship will find right at the beginning of the first file.
Yes.
Let me indicate. Lady, would it be of assistance for me to hand up a draft order? Otherwise, I could just take.
No, I have one.
The draft order?
Yeah, but this is the same draft order that was filed on the 6th of March before Judge Webner.
That comes as news. That comes as news to me, lady.
It said there, 6 March 2018, before Judge Webner, draft order.
Lady,
this may have been the copies in the file or something.
Lady, it shouldn't be in her ladyship's file with respect. And
shall I hand it back to you then?
Yes. Lady, it's also wrong. So may I ask her ladyship to give it back to me?
Yes.
And may I hand up the correct version of the draft orders, which really just tracks the wording of the notice?
Very well. Yes, you handed a copy to Mr. Cook and Mr. Barney.
I have done. Lady, the difference between the two draft orders is simply that the ladyship will know.
Sorry, is that between these two or the two that I handed back to you?
No, lady, the two you're giving back to me are entirely wrong.
Okay, so that I can yes disregard. But you're saying these two that you handed to me are different.
They should be different. Are they different, lady?
I hereby ordered that.
Lady, I'm going to try and simplify this. It may well be that we're working on different pieces of paper. Can I ask her that she go to the notice of motion, because I fear I'm complicating everything. Let me explain to the court what relief my client seeks.
Okay. No, sorry, I'm not saying they're different. I'm asking if they're different. I presume.
Lady, my worry is
they should be the same, huh?
No, they should be different. But the two I've got are exactly the same. So let me just ask the court to go to the notice of motion.
Okay, so these look exactly the same as well. Perhaps you can hand them up to me later on this afternoon. Yes.
May I just explain to your ladyship how the structure of the notice of motion works, because there is some alternative relief, but it's the only decision that the court would have to make.
Well, that would be in the event of non-compliance. Am I right?
Yes, lady, it's page one of.
Yeah, but I mean the point you've made is that enforcement is not a difficulty, right?
It's an issue.
Yes.
committal proceedings can be enforced against any of the respondents or the directors of the corporate entity. It's just not an issue.
Yes.
Lady, prayer 1 is the standard prayer for urgency. I've addressed the court on that. Prayer 2 is asking that pending the final determination of the English proceedings, in other words, only until such time as that is finally determined, the aircraft will be returned by the Guptas at one of the locations indicated. 2.2, the Guptas will be interdicted and restrained from possessing, disposing or using the aircraft except to get it to the safe location. And prayer 3, my clients will store and maintain the aircraft. But, and this is important, lady, my clients can't sell or dispose of the aircraft. In other words, their only job is to keep it. They can't exercise their full panoply of contractual rights. That's a matter for the English court to determine, not for this court. And then lady, prayer 3 deals with a situation where one of the Gupta respondents don't comply with the order. And prayer 3 then says if the Gupta respondents don't comply, the Civil Aviation Authority, that's the 5th respondent, which is abiding,
must revoke the license.
Will revoke the license and deregister the aircraft. So lady, if her ladyship is with us, that is the relief we would ask for. We would ask for prayers 2 and 3 because that gives us really 2 bites at it. It gives us the remedy against the Gupta respondents if they don't comply, the remedy against the CAA.
So you're asking for 2 and prayers 2 and 3, yeah?
And then prayer 3 is an alternative to prayers 2 and 3. I'm sorry, lady, prayers 4 is an alternative to prayers 1 to 3. Lady, there's a typo there. Prayer 4 says alternatively to paragraph 2.1. That's a mistake. It should be alternatively to paragraphs 1 to 3.
1 to 3. Okay.
And the alternative again says pending the determination of the English proceedings. In this case, the remedy is against the CAA. The CAA must take steps to deregister the aircraft.
Sorry, let's just go back. You're saying, just tell me what the exact words that 4 must.
It should say, the first
amended?
line should say alternatively to paragraphs 1 to 3.
Yes, I've got that.
Rather than alternatively to paragraphs 2.1.
Yes,
That's the only change.
It's ordering that pending the final determination
of the English proceedings.
Yes.
And then 4.1 directs the CAA, the Civil Aviation Authority,
that's
to
the
deregister the plane.
in the event of non-compliance.
It's exactly the same, lady. It's just going directly to the CAA rather than to the Guptas. But in our respectful submission, the relief this court should give is relief against the Guptas. If they don't comply, relief against the CAA. In other words, we would ask for the relief in prayers 2 and 3, not the relief in prayers 4, unless the court were against us.
Yes, now, sorry, Mr. Can we just go back to 1? Because 1 you ask that that it be placed in the first and second applicant's custody, sorry, the second applicant's custody, either in the UK, alternatively here.
Alternatively Lanseria. Yes.
It would be Lanseria.
So the one notice of termination referred to the airport in England, Biggin Hill, wherever that may be, and the other one referred to Lanseria, which is just up the road. So they can return it to the UK, or they can.
So they've got the option to return.
They would have the option.
Yes.
Either is acceptable.
All they need to do is pay the costs of the fuel, I suppose, to get it there.
They need to pay the costs of getting it
there
to the safe location, and after that, they lose all rights in relation to the aircraft until such time as the English proceedings are determined.
So that choice is their choice, right?
That's their choice, my lady, yes. Yes, we just specify the locations, my lady. It's either Biggin Hill or it's Lanseria.
Sorry, so if it's Biggin Hill, the CAA can still revoke that license.
Yes, because the plane is
registered in South Africa.
One of the slight oddities of aircraft, or at least to a novice like me, my lady, the aircraft is registered here. The CAA can deregister it, even if the aircraft is sitting in Dubai.
Yes,
they can still deregister it.
And I'm as ignorant of this as you.
Sorry?
I said I'm as ignorant of this as you.
I very much doubt.
Yes. Well, it all goes to the issue of compliance. Sorry, it all goes to the issue of compliance. I need to be certain about that.
Sorry, lady, I've just been given one instruction.
Yes.
In fact, my reading of the notice of motion is wrong. I'm instructed that my client would prefer the court to make the decision about whether it's the English airport, Biggin Hill, or Lanseria. So my client would ask in the first instance, direct them to return it to Biggin Hill. If you don't want them to do that, direct them to return it to Lanseria. But when I say to her ladyship that it's their choice, that in fact isn't their choice. We would ask the court to make the decision in that regard. So it's either Lanseria or it's Biggin Hill. Our primary relief would be Biggin Hill, which is the English airport. And we would ask the court to make a decision in that regard. And the lady, obviously we ask for costs, including the cost of 2 counsel. I've done the best to stick to my time frame.
Yes, I see that.
I've moved speedily through it. Unless the court has any questions, those are our submissions. We would ask for the relief and the notice of motion.
Thank you.
The court, please.
If there are any, I'll raise them in the Mr. Cook, would you like to begin now? You've got 7 or 8 minutes to lunch. Would you?
My lady, I think it would be convenient, if it suits you, for us to adjourn now.
Yes.
Because I wouldn't mind taking a break now.
Yes.
And for us to then continue after lunch. I just, for the record, want to point out that our learned friends have taken 1 hour and 50 minutes of time today in their address, and we would.
I will.
Might be a long day.
Absolutely. I'm happy to go over 4 o'clock this afternoon, Mr. Cook. I won't restrict your argument at all.
My lady, should we cut the lunch hour short?
If you'd like. I know getting lunch at Nilda's is difficult, and you have that wait on a Friday, but let's do 1:45. Yeah.
1:45?
Yes, yes.
All right, cutting out of that, they are taking their lunch break, hearing an application by Export Development Canada, EDC, to ground a plane that's being used by the Gupta family. That's currently underway in the South Gauteng High Court in Johannesburg. It was reported over the weekend that the controversial Gupta family had defaulted on a $41 million loan for the jet, that loan from EDC. And EDC believes the plane might be used to evade justice or for other unlawful means. Concerning Ajay Gupta being declared a fugitive, the EDC reportedly argued in its court papers that there was a concern that the aircraft may be used to escape justice.